The open road, miles of asphalt stretching into darkness. For truck drivers, the highway is their office, their home, their entire world. But what happens when that world stops making sense? Tonight, you're about to hear 11 terrifying true stories from truckers who encountered things on America's highways that defy explanation. Phantom convoys that vanish into fog, rest stops that exist outside of time, and voices on the CB radio calling from decades in the past. The question is, after hearing what they went through, will you ever look at a dark highway the same way again? Buckle up, horror family, because once you're on this road, there's no turning back. You're alone on a deserted interstate at 3 a.m. Fog so thick you can barely see your own hood, and suddenly your mirrors fill with headlights. Dozens of them, rolling up behind you in perfect formation. But here's the thing. 30 seconds ago, there wasn't a single vehicle for miles. Would you speed up and try to outrun them? Or would you slow down and let whatever's behind you pass? I've been driving long haul for 23 years, and I thought I'd seen everything the road had to offer. Weird weather, stranger people, dangerous situations that made my heart pound until I could taste copper in my mouth. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened on Interstate 80 through Nebraska on a cold October night in 2023. That night changed something fundamental in me. Made me question what's real and what's just waiting out there in the dark. Watching us roll by in our big rigs, completely unaware that we're not alone. It started normal enough. I was hauling refrigerated goods from Denver to Chicago, running about 2 hours behind schedule because of construction delays in Colorado. The dispatcher was on my ass about delivery times. So I'd pushed through my usual stop in North Platte and decided to make up time on the empty stretch between there and Grand Island. Anyone who's driven I-80 through Nebraska knows what I'm talking about. It's flat, straight, and mind-numbingly boring, especially at night. The kind of road where you have to actively fight to stay alert because there's nothing to look at except darkness and the occasional reflective mile marker catching your headlights. Around 2:47 a.m., I noticed the fog rolling in. Not unusual for that area, especially in October when the temperature drops and moisture rises from the Platte River Valley. At first, it was just wisps. Thin fingers of mist drifting across the highway like ghosts. Within 10 minutes, though, it had thickened into a solid wall of white that reduced visibility to maybe 50 feet. I slowed down from 70 to about 45, turned on my fog lights, and tightened my grip on the wheel. The highway was completely empty. I hadn't seen another vehicle in over 30 miles, hadn't heard a voice on the CB in even longer. Just me, my truck, and that suffocating fog pressing in from all sides. That's when I first saw them in my mirrors. Headlights, lots of them. They appeared all at once, like someone had flipped a switch and conjured an entire convoy out of thin air. I'm talking about at least a dozen sets of lights, maybe more, arranged in 2 perfect lines that stretched back into the fog as far as I could see. My first reaction was relief. Company on a lonely road, other drivers pushing through the same shitty conditions. But that relief lasted maybe 5 seconds before the wrongness of it hit me. These trucks had appeared instantly. There'd been nothing behind me. I'd been checking my mirrors religiously because of the fog, and then suddenly they were just there, rolling up fast, closing the distance between us with unnatural speed. I grabbed my CB radio, switched to channel 19, and called out, "Hey, convoy behind me on eastbound 80, y'all came out of nowhere. Couldn't see you back there until just now." "What's your 20? Nothing but static. I tried again. "This is westbound. Sorry, eastbound traffic, anyone copy? More static, but this time there was something underneath it. Voices, maybe, but distant and distorted, like a radio signal from very far away or very long ago. The hair on my arms stood up. I checked my mirrors again, and that's when I noticed the trucks themselves weren't right. Even through the fog, I could make out their shapes, and they were wrong. Old. These weren't modern freight liners or Peterbilts with aerodynamic cabs and LED lights. These were cab-overs, the kind they stopped making in the early 80s. Square, boxy things with flat fronts and those distinctive old-style headlights. The fog seemed to cling to them differently than it clung to my truck, swirling around their shapes in patterns that didn't match the wind direction. And there was something else. No company logos, no dot numbers visible on the doors, nothing to identify who they were or what they were hauling. Just weathered, rust-streaked metal that looked like it had been sitting in a junkyard for decades. They maintained their distance behind me, maybe 100 feet back, moving in perfect synchronization. Every time I slowed down, they slowed down. When I sped up slightly to test them, they matched my speed exactly. The formation never broke, never wavered. It was like watching a military convoy, except these trucks looked like they'd been dragged out of history and dropped onto a modern highway. My speedometer read 45. My GPS showed I was making normal progress. But something about the way the fog moved and the way those lights stayed locked in position made me feel like I wasn't actually going anywhere at all. I tried the CB again. This time when I keyed the mic, the static erupted into something that made my blood freeze. Screaming. Not horror movie screaming, but the genuine sounds of people in mortal terror. Men's voices, distorted and distant, crying out in panic and pain. Then came the unmistakable sounds of metal crunching, glass shattering, and beneath it all, a low roar like fire. The transmission lasted maybe 10 seconds before cutting back to dead static. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the mic. I knew those sounds. Every trucker knows those sounds. That was a major accident, a pileup, the kind that makes the national news. I punched the GPS, zooming out to see what was around me. According to the map, I was approaching mile marker 279, about 15 miles west of Grand Island. I grabbed my phone. No signal, of course, because this stretch of 80 is notorious for dead zones. But I downloaded offline maps. I pulled up the location history, satellite view, anything that could tell me what I was dealing with. That's when I saw it. Right at mile marker 279, there was a memorial marker noted on the map. I zoomed in, tried to read the tiny text description. Multi-vehicle accident site, October 15th, 1979. 14 fatalities. October 15th. I glanced at my dashboard clock. October 15th, 3:04 a.m. The anniversary. To the day. Almost to the hour, if the accident had happened in the early morning. My throat went completely dry. I looked in my mirrors again, and the convoy was closer now. Much closer. Close enough that I could see the driver's compartments. They were empty. Every single cab I could make out had nobody behind the wheel. The trucks were driving themselves, rolling down the highway in perfect formation, following me through the fog toward the exact spot where they'd all died 44 years ago. The fog grew thicker, so thick I could barely see the road ahead. My dashboard lights began flickering in a steady rhythm that matched the flashing of the headlights behind me. The temperature inside my cab plummeted. I could see my breath misting in front of my face, despite the heater running full blast. The GPS started glitching, the screen showing my position jumping back and forth along the highway, as if I was existing in multiple places simultaneously. And those sounds on the CB kept coming in waves. Voices calling for help, the shriek of metal, the roar of flames. over and over, like a recording stuck on repeat. Mile marker 279 loomed out of the fog ahead, and I knew with absolute certainty that I didn't want to be on this highway. When those phantom trucks reached their destination, I slammed the accelerator, pushing my rig up to 60 despite the conditions, logic, and safety abandoning me in favor of pure survival instinct. The convoy matched my speed, those antique trucks somehow keeping pace, their empty cabs boring into my mirrors like accusing eyes. The memorial marker flashed past on my right, a simple white cross with faded plastic flowers, and the moment I crossed that exact point, everything changed. The fog vanished. Not gradually, not thinning out, but gone in an instant like someone had torn away a curtain. The highway stretched clear and empty ahead of me, stars visible overhead, my headlights illuminating normal pavement. I checked my mirrors with my heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. Nothing. The convoy was gone. No lights, no trucks, no fog. Just empty road stretching back into darkness. The temperature in my cab normalized immediately. My dashboard lights stopped flickering. The CB went silent, except for normal static. I pulled over at the next rest area, my hands still shaking too badly to drive safely. It took me 20 minutes and 3 cups of truck stop coffee before I could even think about getting back on the road. I spent that time researching the 1979 accident on my phone. 14 trucks in a massive pileup caused by sudden fog and black ice. The lead truck had lost control, and the convoy behind him, they'd been traveling together, all hauling for the same freight company that went bankrupt in 1983. Couldn't stop in time. All 14 drivers died, most burned to death in their cabs. The company trucks were vintage Kenworth cabovers, discontinued in 1982. Rust red with white trailers. No logos because the company painted over them when they started having financial trouble. I've driven I-80 through Nebraska probably 300 times since that night. Haven't seen them again. But every time I approach mile marker 279, especially if there's fog, my hands grip the wheel a little tighter. My eyes check the mirrors a little more frequently, and I make absolutely sure I'm past that spot before 3:04 a.m. hits, because now I know something that keeps me awake on long, lonely nights. The road doesn't forget, and some drivers never really leave it. They're still out there, rolling through the darkness, stuck in the worst moment of their lives, driving the same stretch of highway for eternity. And on the right night, at the right time, they're looking for company on that final, terrible run. If you're part of the Verified Fears family, you understand that the scariest stories are the ones that stay with you, the ones that make you look twice at empty roads and wonder what's really out there. This is mine, and I'm sharing it with you because every time I tell it, the weight gets a little lighter. Maybe you've got your own story, your own stretch of highway that doesn't feel right. Drop it in the comments. Let's carry these fears together, because that's what family does. We face the darkness, and we don't face it alone. Imagine waking up in your sleeper cab at a rest stop in the middle of nowhere, hearing footsteps circling your truck in the darkness. Do you stay hidden and pray they go away? Or do you start the engine and risk drawing their attention? My name is Raven, and I've been running solo routes for 8 years now. In this industry, being a woman driver means you develop certain instincts, certain rules you never break. Always lock your doors. Never park in isolated spots. Trust your gut when something feels off. I followed those rules religiously, and they kept me safe through countless nights on the road. But sometimes, no matter how careful you are, no matter how many precautions you take, you end up in a situation where all your training and instincts aren't enough. What happened to me on Route 66 in New Mexico taught me that some threats don't care about locks or awareness, or any of the safety measures we convince ourselves will keep us protected. It was mid-July, brutally hot even after sunset, and I was 3 days into a run from Albuquerque to Flagstaff. The air conditioning in my Kenworth had been struggling all day, and by the time I hit my federally mandated rest period, I was exhausted, dehydrated, and desperate for sleep. The rest stop appeared exactly when I needed it. One of those bare-bones desert facilities with just bathrooms, a couple of picnic tables, and a parking area. No other trucks, no RVs, not even a passenger car. That should have been my first warning. Rest stops on 66 are usually busy, especially the ones with decent facilities. But I was too tired to process the warning signs, too focused on logging my hours and getting horizontal for my mandatory 10-hour break. I pulled into a spot under one of the few working lights, did my walk around to check the rig, and headed to the bathroom. The whole facility had this abandoned feel to it. Lights flickering, trash bins overflowing like they hadn't been serviced in weeks. Graffiti covering the bathroom stalls. The mirrors were so dirty I could barely see my reflection. Everything echoed in a way that made my footsteps sound like someone else was walking behind me. I finished quickly, practically ran back to my truck, locked both doors, checked them twice, and climbed into the sleeper cab. The heat was oppressive, even with the windows cracked, but I was too tired to care. Within minutes of lying down, I was unconscious. I don't know what woke me. Maybe some subconscious part of my brain registered a sound or vibration. All I know is that I went from deep sleep to wide awake in an instant, my heart already pounding before my conscious mind understood why. The cab was completely dark except for the faint orange glow from the parking lot, light filtering through my curtains. I lay perfectly still, listening, trying to figure out what had triggered my panic response. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, not the random sounds of someone walking to the bathroom or back to their vehicle. These were deliberate, methodical, circling my truck with purpose. I held my breath and listened. The footsteps moved from the passenger side to the front, paused at the hood, then continued to the driver's side. They were slow, measured, and they stopped at each door. I heard the driver's door handle rattle, a gentle testing motion, like someone checking if it was locked. My mouth went completely dry. I'd locked it. I knew I'd locked it. But in that moment, I couldn't remember if I'd heard the mechanism click. Couldn't be certain my exhausted brain hadn't just gone through the motions without actually securing the door. The footsteps continued to the back of the trailer, and I used that moment to slowly, silently reach for my phone on the small shelf above my head. No signal. Of course, there was no signal. We were in the middle of the New Mexico desert, miles from the nearest cell tower. The footsteps came back around to the passenger side, and this time when they stopped at the door, I heard something worse than rattling. Breathing. Heavy, labored breathing right outside my window. Maybe 6 inches from where I lay, frozen in my bunk. I wanted to look. Every instinct screamed at me to peek through the curtain, to see what was out there, to put a face or form to the threat. But something deeper, some primal survival instinct, kept me absolutely still. The breathing continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then the footsteps resumed, moving back toward the front of the truck. This time, I risked movement. I shifted my position slightly, angling myself so I could see the driver's side mirror through a gap in the curtain without moving the fabric. What I saw made my stomach drop. There was a figure standing near the front of my truck, illuminated by the sickly orange parking lot light. At first, I couldn't make out details. Just a human shape, average height, wearing what looked like old clothing. But as I watched, the figure moved, and the motion was all wrong. It jerked and twitched, limbs moving at odd angles like a marionette controlled by someone who didn't quite understand how human bodies work. The head tilted too far to one side, then snapped back to center with an unnatural speed. The figure started circling again, and this time I could track its movement through my mirrors. Each time it passed through the light, I caught more details. The clothing was definitely outdated. Looked like something from the 70s or 80s, brown and weathered and stained with things I didn't want to identify. The face, when I finally got a glimpse of it, was wrong in ways I still can't fully articulate. The features were human but distorted, like a photograph that had been stretched and warped. The eyes reflected the orange light with a shine that reminded me of animal eyes caught in headlights. It, and I'd started thinking of it as it rather than he or she, because whatever this was didn't move like any person I'd ever seen. Completed another full circle around my truck. This time, when it reached the driver's door, it didn't just test the handle. It pulled. Hard. The whole truck rocked slightly with the force of it. I bit down on my hand to keep from making a sound. The door held, the lock mechanism doing its job. But the pulling continued with increasing violence. The figure yanked on the handle over and over, each pull harder than the last, and I could hear something that might have been breathing or might have been growling, a low guttural sound that vibrated through the metal of the truck. I made a decision. Staying here wasn't an option anymore. Whatever this thing was, it was getting more aggressive, more determined to get inside. My keys were in the ignition. I always left them there for quick departures and emergencies. And if I could get to the driver's seat, start the engine, and get moving before it could react, I might have a chance. The alternative was lying in the sleeper cab like a trapped animal, waiting for it to either give up or find a way inside. And based on how hard it was pulling on that door, I didn't think it was going to give up. I counted to 3 in my head, gathering every ounce of courage I had. On 3, I exploded into motion. I threw back the curtain separating the sleeper from the cab, launched myself into the driver's seat, turned the key, and felt the blessed rumble of the diesel engine roaring to life. The dashboard lights illuminated, and in that moment of brightness, I saw the figure standing directly in front of my truck, staring through the windshield at me. Its face was inches from the glass, and now I could see it clearly. The skin was gray and papery, the mouth too wide, stretched into something that might have been a smile but looked more like a wound. The eyes were completely black, no whites at all, just endless darkness that seemed to pull at me even through the barrier of glass and distance. Then it moved, not away, but up, scrambling onto the hood with that same jerking, unnatural motion I'd seen before. It crawled toward the windshield, one hand slapping against the glass hard enough to crack it, reaching for me, that too wide mouth opening impossibly wider. I screamed, couldn't help it, and slammed the truck into gear. The sudden lurch forward should have thrown it off, but it clung to the hood, still reaching, still trying to get to me through the windshield. I floored the accelerator, not caring about speed limits or safety or the fact that I was supposed to be on my rest period. The truck picked up speed, 20, 30, 40 miles per hour through the rest stop parking lot. The figure held on, pressed flat against the hood now, fingers scrabbling at the windshield, leaving long scratches in the glass. I cranked the wheel hard to the right, then back to the left, trying to shake it loose. On the second swerve, it finally lost its grip and tumbled off, rolling across the pavement in a tangle of limbs that bent in directions limbs shouldn't bend. I didn't slow down. I crashed through the rest stop exit without even checking for traffic. There wasn't any. And got back on Route 66, going 60 miles per hour before I even thought about breathing. My mirrors showed the rest stop receding behind me, the orange lights getting smaller and smaller. I couldn't see the figure anymore, couldn't see anything moving in that empty parking lot. But I swear, just before the rest stop disappeared completely from view, I saw something standing at the edge of the light, watching me go. I drove for 2 straight hours before I felt safe enough to stop. And when I finally did, it was at a busy truck stop with dozens of other rigs and bright fluorescent lights everywhere. I inspected the hood and windshield in the harsh light. The windshield had a crack running diagonally across it. And there were scratches, deep ones that looked like they'd been carved with something sharp. The hood had dents and what looked like handprints pressed into the metal with enough force to leave permanent impressions. I reported it to the police as a potential assault, but they didn't take it seriously. Said it was probably just some vagrant or drug addict, dismissed the scratches and dents as normal wear and tear I was misremembering as connected to the incident. They certainly didn't believe my description of how the person moved or what their face looked like. I didn't push it. How could I? I barely believed it myself. But I know what I saw. I know what circled my truck in that deserted rest stop on Route 66. And I know that every time I'm forced to park somewhere isolated, somewhere dark and empty, I check my locks 3 times instead of 2, and I sleep with my keys in my hand and one eye on the mirrors. Because whatever that thing was, it wasn't unique. There are rest stops all over this country that nobody uses, that drivers avoid without really knowing why. Places where the lights flicker and the shadows move wrong, and something waits for trucks to park in the darkness. If you're out there driving, if you're reading this and nodding because you felt that same wrongness at certain stops, drop a comment. Let the Verified Fears family know where these places are. Maybe together we can map the danger zones, warn each other, keep each other safe. Because out here on the road, we're all we've got. And sometimes sharing our nightmares is the only way to survive them. What if your CB radio picked up a distress call from a driver describing your exact location, your exact situation? But the transmission was coming from 30 years in the past. Would you respond knowing it's impossible? Or would you listen as history repeats itself around you? I need to tell you about something that happened to me last September on Highway 93 through Montana. Something that's kept me awake more nights than I can count. I'm a logical person. I believe in science, in rational explanations, in the concrete reality of what we can see and measure. But what I experienced on that lonely stretch of highway challenged everything I thought I understood about time, reality, and the nature of the road itself. I've tried to explain it away, tried to convince myself there was some reasonable cause, but the facts don't lie. And the evidence is still sitting in my glove compartment, impossible and undeniable. It was a Thursday night, around 11 p.m., and I was running a load of electronic equipment from Missoula toward the Canadian border. Highway 93 through Montana is beautiful during the day. Mountains, forests, wide open spaces that make you feel like you're driving through a nature documentary. At night, though, it's a different story. The darkness up there is absolute. The kind of black that presses against your windshield like a living thing. Cell service is non-existent for long stretches, and sometimes you can drive for an hour without seeing another vehicle. That night, I hadn't seen headlights in either direction for close to 90 minutes. I had my CB radio on, more for company than anything else. The static was soothing in a weird way. Proof that the equipment worked even if nobody was using it. Most drivers don't use CB anymore, Everyone's got cell phones and satellite communication, but I'm old school. There's something comforting about that crackle of static, that connection to trucking history, and the millions of drivers who've crossed these same roads listening to that same sound. At 11:34 p.m., the static changed. It got louder, more intense, and underneath it, I could hear something that made me reach for the volume knob. A voice. Distant and distorted, like a radio signal from very far away, but definitely a voice. I turned up the volume, and the words became clearer. Anyone copy? This is northbound 93, mile marker 86. I've got a situation here. Engine just died, losing power, and there's something wrong with the fog. If anyone can hear this, I'm at mile marker 86, just past the turnoff for... The transmission dissolved into static. I grabbed my mic immediately. This is northbound 93. I copy your transmission. What's your 20? Mile marker 86, you said? Nothing but static. I tried again. Driver in distress on 93. This is northbound traffic. I'm about 10 miles south of you. What's your situation? Still nothing. The static continued, but the voice was gone. I checked my GPS. I was currently at mile marker 76, which meant if this driver was really at 86 and having mechanical issues, I'd reach him in about 10 minutes. I pushed my speed up to 70, scanning the road ahead for any sign of brake lights or emergency flashers. The highway remained empty, just my headlights cutting through the darkness and the broken white line disappearing under my hood. Then, at exactly 11:41 p.m., the voice came back. Getting thicker. Can't see more than a few feet now. This isn't normal fog. Something's wrong with it. If anyone's hearing this, stay away from mile marker 86. Don't stop. Whatever you do, don't... Static again, but this time there was something underneath it. A sound that might have been wind or might have been breathing, low and rhythmic and wrong. My hands tightened on the wheel. The fog he was describing. I wasn't seeing any fog. The night was clear, stars visible overhead, visibility perfect. But something about his voice, the genuine fear in it, made my skin crawl. I was at mile marker 79 now, getting closer. I tried the radio again. Driver at 86, if you can hear me, I'm 5 minutes out. Stay with your vehicle, keep your doors locked. I'm coming to assist. The response came immediately, but it wasn't directed at me. It's at the window. Oh God, it's looking at me. I can't see what it is through the fog, just a shape. But it knows I'm in here. It's scratching at the glass. Why isn't anyone responding? Is anyone out there? This is mile marker 86, Highway 93, November 12th, and something is trying to get into my truck. His voice broke on the last word, terror making it almost unrecognizable as human speech. November 12th. He'd said November 12th, but it was September 18th. I looked at my dashboard calendar to confirm, but I already knew what it would say. September 18th, 2024. My brain started working overtime, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. A recording somehow playing over CB frequencies? But CB doesn't work like that. It's real-time communication, not a broadcast system. A prank? But the fear in that voice was real, and pranks don't usually include specific dates that don't match current reality. Mile marker 82. 3 miles to go. The voice came again, weaker now, almost sobbing. Please, if anyone can hear this, tell my wife I love her. Tell Sarah I'm sorry. It's breaking through the glass. I can hear it cracking. This is driver's license number MT4421788, vehicle registration. A sound of shattering glass cut through the transmission, followed by screaming. Not the quick scream of surprise, but prolonged, agonized screaming that went on for 15 seconds before cutting off abruptly. Then nothing. Just static. I was at mile marker 84. And that's when I saw it. Fog. Thick, unnatural fog that appeared like a wall across the highway, starting exactly at what I could now see was mile marker 85. It hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. The road had been clear, but now it stretched across both lanes. Dense and white and somehow wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. It didn't move like fog should move. It held its position like a curtain, waiting. Every instinct I had screamed at me to slow down, to stop, to turn around. But I couldn't. That driver, whoever he was, had been calling for help. Even if the transmission was old, even if it made no sense, I had to check mile marker 86. I had to know. I eased off the accelerator, dropping to 40 miles per hour as I approached the fog bank. My headlights barely penetrated it, reflecting back at me like I was shining them at a white wall. I entered the fog at mile marker 85, and the world changed. The temperature dropped instantly, my breath fogging inside the cab despite the heater running. The visibility went to almost nothing. I could barely see 10 feet ahead. The dashboard lights flickered, and my radio erupted with static so loud I had to turn the volume down. Under the static, I could hear voices. Multiple voices now, overlapping, all describing similar situations. Engine trouble, fog, something approaching, calls for help that went unanswered. Mile marker 86 appeared through the fog, and I almost missed it because I was staring at what was illuminated in my headlights just beyond it. A truck, an old Peterbilt, late 1980s model by the look of it, parked on the shoulder with its emergency flashers on. The paint was faded, the chrome rusted, and vegetation had grown up around the tires like it had been sitting there for years. The driver's side window was shattered, glass scattered across the ground, and the door hung open at an odd angle. I pulled over behind it, every hair on my body standing on end. This was wrong. This was all desperately wrong. But I grabbed my flashlight and my tire iron and stepped out of my cab. The fog swirled around me, cold and damp, and the silence was absolute except for the idle of my own engine. I approached the abandoned truck slowly, flashlight beam cutting through the fog. The cab was empty, but showed signs of violence. The steering wheel was bent, the seat torn, and there were scratches on the inside of the doors, like someone had tried desperately to claw their way out. On the passenger seat, I found a logbook. I picked it up with shaking hands and opened it to the last entry. The handwriting was shaky. Panicked. November 12th, 1995. Mile marker 86. Engine died. Fog came. Called for help, but nobody answered. Something in the fog. It sees me. It knows I'm here. 1995. 29 years ago. I stood there in the fog, holding a logbook from a truck that had been abandoned for nearly 3 decades, and my radio crackled to life in my truck behind me. The voice came through clear now. No static, like the speaker was standing right next to me. You should have stayed away. You should have kept driving. Now you're here at mile marker 86, and the fog knows you're here too. I ran. I'm not proud of it. But I dropped that logbook and ran back to my truck, threw myself into the cab, and slammed the door. The fog pressed against my windows, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw shapes moving in it. Not human shapes, but something else. Something that moved with purpose and intelligence. I put the truck in gear and floored it, not caring about the fog or visibility or anything except getting away from mile marker 86. The fog released me at mile marker 87, just disappeared like it had never been there. I drove straight through to the Canadian border without stopping, my hands shaking on the wheel the entire time. When I got to the border station, I asked the agent if he knew anything about Highway 93, mile marker 86, Any accidents or incidents there? He gave me a strange look and said, yeah, actually, there had been several unexplained disappearances over the years. Trucks found abandoned, drivers never located. The last one was back in 1995. I went to the Montana Highway Patrol the next day with the story. They listened politely and told me there was indeed a cold case from November 1995, a driver named Michael Patterson who vanished on Highway 93. His truck was found at mile marker 86, abandoned, driver's side window shattered. He was never found. They showed me his license photo, and I recognized the voice somehow. Just from hearing him scream over the radio, I knew that was the man who'd been calling for help that night. Here's the thing that still haunts me. I recorded the radio transmissions on my phone. When I played them back, they were there, clear as day. A man calling for help from 1995, his voice traveling through time on CB frequencies, replaying his final moments for anyone unlucky enough to be listening at the right place and the right time. The recording is still on my phone. I've played it for other drivers, for investigators, for anyone who'll listen. Some people hear it, others just hear static. I don't know what that means. I don't drive Highway 93 anymore. I take longer routes, add hours to my trips, whatever it takes to avoid that stretch of road. Because I know now that some places trap moments in time, replay tragedies over and over. And if you're unlucky enough to be there when the replay starts, you might become part of the loop. Michael Patterson called for help in 1995, and nobody came. His voice is still calling, still asking for someone to respond, still warning about the fog and what waits inside it. If you drive Highway 93, if you pass mile marker 86, keep your CB off. Don't listen. Don't stop. And if you see fog where there shouldn't be fog, keep driving no matter what you hear. Some calls for help come too late to answer. And trying to help might just add your voice to the frequency that shouldn't exist. The Verified Fears family knows that sometimes the road holds on to things, holds on to moments of terror and tragedy. And all we can do is bear witness and warn others. Stay safe out there and remember, not every voice asking for help can be saved. Imagine picking up a stranger on a rainy night who starts telling you things about your life that nobody knows. Your deepest secrets, your buried guilt, your darkest moments. Would you demand answers? Or would you be too terrified to even look at them? I broke my own rule on a Wednesday night in October, and that decision cost me something I can't quite name but feel missing every day since. See, I've been hauling freight for 16 years, and in that time I've developed ironclad rules about hitchhikers. Don't pick them up, ever, no exceptions. It's not about being unkind or lacking compassion. It's about survival and common sense in an industry where drivers have been robbed, assaulted, and worse by people they tried to help. But that night, on a rain-soaked stretch of Highway 101 through Oregon, I saw someone standing on the shoulder in a downpour that would drown a fish, and something made me slow down. Something made me stop. I wish to God I hadn't. The figure was illuminated in my headlights, arm outstretched with thumb up in the universal gesture of hitchhiking. What struck me immediately was how well-dressed they were. Nice slacks, a button-down shirt, a jacket that looked expensive, even soaking wet. Not the typical road wanderer or transient. No backpack, no duffel bag, nothing to indicate they were traveling. Just standing there in the pouring rain at 11 o'clock at night on a highway with nothing around for 20 miles in either direction. I pulled over before my logical brain could override the impulse, and the passenger door opened before I could reconsider. He climbed in. I could see now it was a man. Probably in his 40s, with neat hair plastered to his head from the rain and a face that was neither threatening nor friendly, just blank and calm. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet and oddly formal. "I appreciate your kindness. Not many would stop on a night like this." I nodded, putting the truck in gear, already regretting my decision, but committed now. "Where you headed?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He smiled, a small expression that didn't reach his eyes. "The same direction you're going. I'll know when we get there." That should have been warning enough, but I chalked it up to the quirks of someone who'd been stuck in the rain too long. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the rhythmic thump of the wipers and the hiss of rain on the windshield. I kept glancing at him from the corner of my eye. He sat perfectly still, hands folded in his lap, staring straight ahead with an expression of patient waiting. His clothes, I noticed, weren't dripping. The rain should have left puddles on my floor mat, but there was nothing. He was wet. I could see that his hair and shirt were damp, but he wasn't dripping water. Small detail, but it nagged at me. "You've been driving this route a long time," he said suddenly. Not a question, but a statement. I nodded. "Yeah, about 8 years. I do the Portland to San Francisco run pretty regularly." He turned to look at me then, and his eyes were darker than they should have been in the dim cab light. 8 years, 2 months, and 17 days to be precise. You started this route on August 14th, 2016. Your first haul was lumber. You almost didn't take the job because you just lost your father and weren't sure you could handle being alone with your thoughts for that long. My hands tightened on the wheel. "How do you know that?" He didn't answer, just kept looking at me with those two dark eyes. "The funeral was on August 10th. You didn't cry at the service because your mother needed you to be strong, but you cried for an hour straight at a rest stop outside Salem on your first night driving this road. You parked in the far corner where nobody could see you and let it all out. I felt cold despite the heater running full blast. Who the hell are you? Did someone hire you to, what, investigate me? Is this some kind of corporate surveillance?" He shook his head slowly. "No investigation. I just know things. I know that you blamed yourself for your father's death because you didn't visit him the week before his heart attack. You were supposed to drive up to Seattle to see him, but you took an extra run instead because the money was good. You think if you'd been there, you might have noticed the signs, might have gotten him to a hospital in time." "Stop," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Stop talking." But he didn't stop. "I know about Jennifer, too. The woman you were engaged to before you started long-haul trucking. You broke off the engagement not because you didn't love her, but because you did, and you couldn't tell her about what happened in Spokane. You carry that secret like a stone, don't you?" My heart was hammering now, sweat breaking out on my forehead despite the cold I felt. Spokane. Nobody knew about Spokane. Nobody could know about Spokane because I'd never told a living soul, had buried it so deep I sometimes convinced myself it never happened. "How?" I managed to say, my voice shaking. "How could you possibly know about that?" He smiled again, that empty expression that held no warmth. March 3rd, 2015. You were driving eastbound on I-90, approaching Spokane around 2 in the morning. There was another vehicle, a sedan, weaving between lanes. You thought they were drunk. They cut you off and you hit the brakes, but they overcorrected, went off the road, rolled down an embankment. You saw it happen in your mirrors. "Stop," I said again, louder this time. But he continued as if I hadn't spoken. You slowed down, almost stopped. You had your hand on the CB radio, ready to call it in. But then you thought about the investigation, the delays, the questions about whether you were following too close or driving too fast. You thought about your record, your insurance, your job. So you kept driving. You told yourself someone else would see it, would call for help. But that stretch of highway was empty. Nobody else came along until morning, and by then the driver of that sedan was dead. Died from injuries that might have been survivable if someone had called for help immediately. I was shaking now, both hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles were white. You need to get out. I don't know what kind of game this is, but you need to get the hell out of my truck right now. I started to slow down, looking for a place to pull over. The hitchhiker remained calm, unbothered by my panic. The driver's name was Marcus Chen. He was 32 years old, father of 2. He'd been working a double shift and fell asleep at the wheel. It wasn't alcohol. He was just exhausted, just trying to provide for his family. He might have lived if you'd stopped. Tears were running down my face now, a mixture of rage and guilt and terror. How do you know this? Are you a cop? A private investigator? Someone from his family? He turned back to face forward, his expression unchanging. I'm not any of those things. I'm just someone who knows. I know what you did. And more importantly, I know what you didn't do. I know you've thought about Marcus Chen every single day since then. I know you looked up his obituary, read about his wife and daughters, saw their pictures. I know you've driven past that spot on I-90 hundreds of times and always looked for the place where his car went off the road. What do you want from me? I was practically shouting now. Money? Confession? What? He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost sad. I don't want anything from you. I'm just here to remind you that secrets aren't as buried as you think they are. The things we carry, the guilt we hide, the moments we wish we could undo, they're all still there, written in the fabric of our lives, visible to those who know how to look. I found a wide spot in the shoulder and slammed on the brakes, the truck shuddering to a stop. Get out. Get out right now. I turned to face him fully, ready to physically throw him out if necessary. But the passenger seat was empty. Completely empty. The door was still closed, locked from the inside. The seat was dry, no indication anyone had been sitting there. I reached out and touched the fabric, bone dry, no heat, no moisture, nothing to suggest a person had been there at all. My breath came in short gasps as I looked around the cab. Had I imagined it? No, that was impossible. We'd talked for at least 15 minutes. He'd climbed into my truck, sat right there, told me things that nobody could know. But there was no evidence. No wet footprints, no indentation in the seat, nothing. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and checked the time. It was 11:47 p.m. When I'd picked up the hitchhiker, it had been 11:38. But we'd driven for at least 20 minutes, talked for longer than that. The math didn't work. I pulled up my GPS history, tracking my route. There was a gap. From 11:38 to 11:47, my truck hadn't moved. According to the GPS, I'd been sitting still on the shoulder of Highway 101 for 9 minutes. But I remembered driving. I remembered the conversation. I remembered every word he'd said about my father, about Jennifer, about Marcus Chen, and that night in Spokane that had haunted me for 9 years. I sat there on the shoulder for another 20 minutes, trying to make sense of what had happened. Eventually, I convinced myself to keep driving, to finish my route, to pretend that I'd had some kind of episode brought on by exhaustion or stress. But in the back of my mind, I knew the truth. I'd picked up something on that rainy highway, something that wasn't quite human, something that knew the weight of the secrets I carried. The next day, I did something I should have done years ago. I called the Spokane Police Department and told them about the accident on I-90, about Marcus Chen, about how I'd driven past and didn't stop. I gave them the date, the time, the location. The officer who took my statement was quiet for a long moment before telling me they'd known there was another vehicle involved. Tire marks and other evidence suggested someone had caused Chen to swerve, but they'd never been able to identify who. They thanked me for finally coming forward, said it wouldn't change the outcome, but it would give the family closure. I don't know if that's what the hitchhiker wanted, if somehow my confession was the price of that encounter. I don't know if he was a ghost, a hallucination, an angel, or a demon. All I know is that since that night, the weight I've carried for 9 years has been slightly lighter. The guilt is still there. It should be there. I deserve it. But the secret part is gone. Someone knows. Someone saw. And somehow, that makes it bearable. I still drive Highway 101 through Oregon, but I don't pick up hitchhikers anymore. Not because I'm afraid of them, but because I'm afraid of what they might tell me, what other secrets they might pull from the hidden corners of my life. We all carry things we don't want revealed, moments we're not proud of, decisions we wish we could unmake. That night taught me that nothing stays buried forever. And sometimes the road sends messengers to remind us that our sins, no matter how well hidden, are never truly forgotten. To the Verified Fears family out there, I'm sharing this not for sympathy, but as a warning. The people you meet on the road aren't always what they seem. And sometimes they're not people at all. Sometimes they're reflections of our own guilt and conscience, given form and voice. And sometimes the scariest encounters aren't with monsters or ghosts, but with the truth we've been running from. Stay safe out there and remember, the things we carry are heavier than any load we haul. What would you do if you stopped at a busy truck stop for fuel and food, then walked out an hour later to find your truck aged decades and the building around you crumbling into ruin? Would you trust what you're seeing, or would you question your own sanity? My name is Derek, and I've been a long-haul trucker for 12 years. In that time, I've learned to trust my instincts about which stops are safe, which roads to avoid, and when something feels off. But no amount of experience or instinct could have prepared me for what happened on a seemingly routine night in rural Texas. What I'm about to tell you happened 6 months ago, and I still can't explain it. I've tried talking to other drivers, searched online for similar experiences, even contacted paranormal investigators. Nobody has answers. All I have is my story and the physical evidence that proves I'm not crazy, that what happened to me was real, even if it's impossible. It was late June, around 9:30 at night, and I was hauling automotive parts from Houston toward Amarillo on Highway 84. The heat had been oppressive all day, even with the AC running full blast, and by the time the sun set, I was exhausted, hungry, and running low on fuel. I'd been planning to stop in the small town of Snyder, but my GPS showed a truck stop about 20 miles before that, right off the highway. Perfect timing. I could fuel up, grab some food, maybe stretch my legs for 20 minutes before pushing on. The truck stop appeared exactly where the GPS indicated, well lit and busy. I could see at least a dozen other big rigs in the lot, several passenger cars at the fuel pumps. And through the large windows, I could make out people moving around inside the convenience store and restaurant. The sign read, "Longhorn Travel Plaza," in big red letters. with a smaller sign below advertising diesel, showers, and hot food 24 hours. It looked like every other truck stop I'd been to across Texas. Generic, clean, functional. Nothing remarkable about it at all. I pulled into a parking spot away from the pumps, planning to fuel up after I ate. The lot was busy but not crowded, and I found a space easily near the back. I did my usual routine, locked the cab, pocketed my wallet and phone, stretched my back. The air outside was still warm but pleasant compared to the daytime heat. I could hear the normal sounds of a truck stop. Diesel engines idling, the beep of fuel pumps, distant conversation, the hiss of air brakes. Everything was perfectly, completely normal. Inside, the place was busy. Drivers sat at the counter and in booths, eating and talking. The smell of coffee and fried food filled the air. A bored-looking teenager worked the cash register while an older woman waited tables. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Country music played from speakers I couldn't see. I grabbed a seat at the counter, ordered a burger and fries and coffee, and settled in to eat. The food came quickly. Nothing special but hot and filling. I ate slowly, checked my phone for messages, watched a baseball game on the TV mounted in the corner. I was there for about 50 minutes total. Ate my meal, used the restroom, bought a couple of energy drinks and a bag of chips for the road. Paid cash. I remember this clearly because the register was slow and the teenager had to count out my change twice. The total was $23.67. I left a $3 tip for the waitress and headed back outside, feeling refreshed and ready for the next leg of the drive. The parking lot was different. That was the first thing I noticed. My brain tried to reject what my eyes were seeing. The lights were dimmer. No, not dimmer. Some of them were out completely. The pavement under my feet was cracked and buckled, weeds growing through the brakes. And there were no other trucks. The lot was completely empty except for my rig, which sat alone in the back corner where I'd left it. But it wasn't the same truck I'd parked an hour ago. I stopped walking, my heart beginning to pound. My truck, my nearly new 2023 Freightliner Cascadia that I'd bought just 8 months earlier, looked like it had been sitting abandoned for years. The paint was faded and peeling, rust spreading across the hood and doors. The chrome bumper was corroded and dull. The tires were flat, vegetation growing up around them. The windshield was so dirty and weathered, I couldn't see through it. And there was dust. Thick layers of dust coating every surface, the kind that accumulates over years, not minutes. I turned around slowly, looking back at the truck stop. The building was dark. Not closed for the night dark, but abandoned dark. Windows were broken. The glass doors I'd just walked through were boarded up with weathered plywood. The Longhorn Travel Plaza sign was still there, but the lights were off. The letters faded and several missing entirely. Graffiti covered the lower walls. The fuel pumps were gone, not removed, but gone, with only rusted concrete pads showing where they'd been. The parking lot was a maze of cracks and potholes, and in the distance I could see the highway, but it looked wrong, overgrown, less traveled. I stood there trying to process what I was seeing, my mind racing through explanations. Had I been drugged? Was I having a stroke? Was this some kind of elaborate prank? But the evidence was everywhere, undeniable and consistent. This place was abandoned, had been abandoned for years. And yet, I'd just been inside. Just eaten a hot meal. Just paid a teenager for food that had been cooked in a functioning kitchen. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. The time showed 10:32 p.m., about right for how long I'd been inside. But the date. The date was wrong. It said June 28, 2024, same as when I'd gone inside. I opened my GPS app, and it showed my location as the same truck stop. But when I zoomed out to satellite view, the image showed an abandoned building, exactly like what I was seeing now. I checked my call history, my messages, anything to anchor myself in time. Everything on my phone said it was June 28th, 10:32 p.m. But the world around me looked decades older. I approached my truck slowly, almost afraid to touch it. The driver's door was locked. I could see my key fob still worked because the locks clicked when I pressed the button. But the sound was wrong, rusty and grinding. I pulled the door open and it creaked on corroded hinges. The interior was covered in dust. The seats cracked and faded, the dashboard weathered and sun-damaged. But my belongings were still there. My logbook, my travel mug, the air freshener I'd hung from the mirror just 2 days ago. All there, all aged and weathered like everything else. I climbed into the cab and tried the ignition. The engine turned over after several attempts, coughing and sputtering before settling into a rough idle. The fuel gauge showed 3/4 full, exactly what it had shown when I parked. The odometer reading was the same. Everything about the truck's systems indicated only an hour had passed. But the physical deterioration told a different story entirely. I didn't know what else to do, so I drove. I pulled out of that abandoned parking lot and got back on Highway 84, heading toward Amarillo like I'd planned. The road was the same, but different. More worn, less maintained, with stretches that looked like they hadn't seen repair crews in years. I passed through Snyder 20 minutes later, and it looked normal. Modern, current. Buildings I recognized, traffic, lights. I pulled into a legitimate truck stop, one I'd been to before. And the date on their pumps and inside the store confirmed it was still June 28th, 2024. I spent 3 hours at that stop, cleaning years of accumulated grime off my truck. It took industrial degreaser and serious elbow grease, but slowly I restored it to something approaching its normal appearance. The rust was superficial. Underneath, the metal was sound. The tires weren't actually flat. They just looked that way under all the dirt. The interior cleaned up with leather conditioner and patience. By 2 in the morning, my truck looked mostly normal again, though there were signs of the aging that I couldn't fully erase. Tiny rust spots, a crack in the windshield that hadn't been there before, a general weathering that shouldn't exist on an 8-month-old vehicle. I reported the abandoned truck stop to the Texas DOT the next day. The coordinates I gave them showed an empty lot. No building, no pumps, no pavement, just bare land that had never been developed. They were polite but clearly thought I was confused about the location. I insisted, sent them photos from my phone, but the photos showed the same thing their records did. An empty field. The Longhorn Travel Plaza didn't exist, had never existed according to every database I checked. Except, I have the receipt. In my wallet right now, I have a cash register receipt from Longhorn Travel Plaza, dated June 28th, 2024, for $23.67. The paper is yellowed and brittle like it's decades old. The ink faded, but still readable. I've had it examined by a document expert who confirmed the paper stock and printing method are from the 1980s or early 1990s, but it's dated 2024, has current prices, and lists items that match exactly what I remember ordering. I've driven Highway 84 through that area a dozen times since then, always during the day, always alert for any sign of the Longhorn Travel Plaza. The location is just empty desert, a dirt turnoff that goes nowhere. But sometimes, late at night when I'm driving other routes, I'll see a truck stop in the distance that looks a little too bright, a little too busy, a little too perfect. And I keep driving because I learned something that night in Texas. Some places exist outside normal time. Some buildings are doorways to when and where they used to be. And if you're not careful, you can step through those doorways and lose more than just an hour. You can lose years, decades, maybe more. The aging on my truck has never fully gone away. Small reminders remain, the windshield crack that shouldn't be there, rust spots that keep appearing no matter how often I treat them, an odor in the cab that smells like decades of use despite the truck being less than a year old. It's like my truck spent years parked in that abandoned lot, even though I was only gone for 50 minutes. Time moved differently there, or maybe time didn't move at all, and I brought a piece of the past back with me. I don't have answers, just questions, and that yellowed receipt that shouldn't exist. All I know for certain is that I walked into a functioning truck stop in 2024 and walked out into some other year, some abandoned future or alternate present where that place had been rotting for decades. And for just a moment, just those 50 minutes, I existed in both times simultaneously, eating a hot meal in a busy restaurant while sitting alone in ruins that nobody else could see. What if a massive black dog appeared in the middle of a dark highway, refusing to move, staring at you with eyes that burned like embers? Would you swerve around it, slam on the brakes, or drive straight through knowing that some legends warn stopping for the black dog means death? Sleep deprivation does things to your mind. After 18 hours behind the wheel, reality starts to blur at the edges. Shadows move in ways they shouldn't. Your peripheral vision catches things that aren't there when you look directly at them. Every trucker knows this feeling, knows the dangerous point where exhaustion makes you see things, makes you question what's real and what's your brain misfiring from lack of rest. I thought I knew the difference. I thought after 11 years of long-haul driving, I could distinguish between fatigue-induced hallucinations and genuine threats. Highway 87 through Arizona taught me I was wrong. It was late March, one of those runs where everything that could go wrong did. I'd left Phoenix at 6 in the morning, hauling construction equipment toward the New Mexico border. Should have been a straightforward drive, maybe 10 hours with stops. But a jackknifed semi closed the highway for 3 hours outside Payson. Then my refrigeration unit started acting up, despite hauling dry cargo, throwing error codes that forced me to pull over twice to reset the system. By the time I was back on 87, heading north through the high desert, it was past midnight, and I'd burned through my entire buffer time. I should have stopped. I knew I should have stopped. But the delivery was time-sensitive, and the client had made it clear that delays would result in penalties I couldn't afford. So I pushed on, drinking gas station coffee that had gone cold hours ago, chewing caffeine gum, blasting the radio to keep myself alert. The highway was empty. I hadn't seen another vehicle in over 30 miles. Just me, my headlights cutting through the darkness, and the endless center line disappearing under my hood. That's when I first saw the dog. It appeared in my high beams about 200 yards ahead, standing in the middle of my lane. At first I thought it was a regular dog, maybe a stray or someone's pet that had wandered onto the highway. But as I got closer, still doing about 65 miles per hour, I realized the scale was wrong. This wasn't a normal dog. It was massive. Easily the size of a small bear with a coat so black it seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. And it wasn't moving. Just standing there, directly in my path, staring at my approaching truck with eyes that glowed red in my headlights. I hit the brakes, not a panic stop, but a controlled slowdown, watching the dog the entire time. It didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't show any sign of self-preservation instinct. Just stood there as I decelerated from 65 to 40 to 20. When I was about 50 feet away, close enough to see details, I stopped completely. The dog was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Its fur was long and matted, its body lean and muscular. The eyes that had glowed red now looked almost normal, but there was an intelligence in them that made my skin crawl. It was looking at me. Not just looking, studying me, evaluating me, making some kind of decision. I sat there with my foot on the brake, engine idling, trying to decide what to do. Horn it off the road? Wait for it to move? Back up and try to go around? The dog solved my dilemma by walking slowly off the highway, disappearing into the darkness beyond the reach of my headlights. I waited another 30 seconds to make sure it was gone, then carefully accelerated, keeping my eyes on the spot where it had vanished. Nothing. Just empty desert and darkness. 5 miles later, it was back. Same position, middle of the lane, same massive size, same glowing red eyes. My heart rate kicked up. This wasn't possible. I'd been watching my mirrors. Nothing had passed me. Nothing could have gotten ahead of me. But there it was, forcing me to slow down again. This time I got closer before stopping, maybe 30 feet away, and I could see details that made my breath catch. The dog's mouth was open slightly, and I could see teeth that were too large, too sharp. Its breath misted in my headlights despite the night being warm. And it was still staring at me with that unnerving intelligence, like it knew exactly what it was doing. I leaned on the horn, a long, sustained blast that shattered the desert silence. The dog didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't close its eyes against the sound, nothing. I flashed my high beams, trying to startle it into moving. No response. It just stood there, patient and immovable, waiting. I felt anger rising through my fear. I didn't have time for this, didn't have the energy to deal with whatever this was. I revved the engine, inching forward, trying to intimidate it into moving. The dog held its ground until I was maybe 10 feet away, then casually walked off the highway again, disappearing into the darkness like it had never been there. The third appearance came 3 miles later, and this time my anger had shifted entirely to fear. The dog was in the road again, same position, but now I was starting to recognize it for what it was. My grandmother had been a trucker in the 70s and 80s, and she'd told me stories about the black dog when I was a kid. Old folklore, trucker legends passed down for generations. The black dog appears on lonely highways, she'd said, and if you see it 3 times in one night, you're marked. Some stories said it was a warning of death ahead. Others claimed it was death itself, following you, waiting for you to make a mistake. I'd always dismissed it as superstition, the kind of story drivers tell to scare rookies or pass time in truck stop diners. But here it was, appearing for the 3rd time, and suddenly those old stories didn't feel like folklore anymore. I was exhausted, more tired than I'd been in months, fighting to keep my eyes open and my mind focused. And this thing, this black dog that shouldn't exist, kept putting itself in my path, forcing me to stop, forcing me to stay alert and aware. Was it trying to kill me? Or was it trying to keep me from killing myself? I slowed down again, but this time I kept my distance, stopping a good 100 feet back. The dog remained in position, watching me. We stayed like that for almost a minute, predator and prey in some kind of standoff, though I wasn't sure which of us was which. Then something changed. The dog's posture shifted, its head tilting slightly, and I got the distinct impression it was satisfied with something. It turned and walked off the highway, but this time it didn't disappear immediately. It stopped at the edge of the darkness, turned back to look at me one final time, then vanished. I sat there shaking, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my fingers ached. Every instinct told me to turn around, find the nearest town, park somewhere with lights and people, and wait for sunrise. But I was so close to my delivery point, maybe 40 miles away, and turning back meant hours of lost time I couldn't recover. I made a decision. I would continue, but slowly. 30 miles per hour, flashers on, complete focus on the road ahead. The dog didn't appear again. But I swear I could see it in my peripheral vision for the rest of the drive, keeping pace with my truck just beyond the reach of my headlights, running parallel to the highway like an escort or a guard. Every time I started to feel my eyes getting heavy, every time my attention began to drift, I'd catch a glimpse of movement in the darkness and snap back to full alertness. I made it to the delivery point at 4:30 in the morning, exhausted but alive. As I was backing up to the loading dock, one of the warehouse workers came out to guide me. After I'd parked and climbed down from the cab, he approached me with a concerned expression. "You okay, man? You look like you've seen a ghost?" I almost laughed at that. "Long drive," I said. "Barely made it." He nodded sympathetically. "Lucky you did make it. We just got word about a bad accident on 87, about 20 miles south of here. Happened around 1:30 this morning. Trucker fell asleep at the wheel, crossed the median, hit an RV head-on. 5 people dead, including the driver." The timing clicked in my head immediately. 1:30 in the morning, right around when I'd seen the black dog for the first time. 20 miles south, approximately where I would have been if I'd maintained my original speed, instead of being forced to slow down repeatedly. I drove 87 regularly after that night, sometimes during the day, sometimes at night. Never saw the black dog again. But I've talked to other drivers, shared the story in truck stops and online forums, and the responses I get tell me I'm not alone. The black dog has been seen by hundreds of drivers over the decades, maybe thousands. Some describe it exactly as I did. Massive, black as coal, red eyes that glow in the headlights. Others say it's smaller or gray or has different features. But the pattern is always the same. It appears to exhausted drivers, forces them to slow down, stay alert, pay attention. The theories vary. Some think it's a protective spirit, a guardian of the highways that intervenes when drivers are in danger. Others believe it's a death omen that marks those who are about to die. And if you heed its warning, you might survive. A few claim it's the ghost of a driver who died on the road and now tries to prevent others from suffering the same fate. I've heard explanations ranging from mass hallucination caused by exhaustion to genuine paranormal phenomena. I don't know what the black dog is. All I know is that it appeared to me 3 times on a night when I was dangerously tired, running on fumes and stubbornness, heading toward a stretch of highway where 5 people died because another driver was in the exact same condition I was in. And whether it was trying to save me or claim me, whether it was real or hallucination, it kept me alert and alive long enough to reach safety. The scar on my truck's hood is still there. 3 deep scratches that weren't there before that night, arranged in a pattern that could be claw marks if dogs had claws that big. The paint analysis showed the scratches go down to bare metal and contain trace elements that don't match anything in the standard database. I tell people it happened during loading, that something scraped the hood. But I know the truth. At some point during that night, while I was stopped and staring at the black dog, it marked my truck. Either as a warning or a protection, I'll never know. I don't drive exhausted anymore. That night cured me of any temptation to push beyond my limits. When I'm tired, I stop, no matter the delivery deadline or financial penalties. Because I learned that some things are worse than being late, and some highways have guardians that enforce their own rules. The black dog let me live. Let me pass through its territory with just a warning and a reminder of mortality. Not every driver is that lucky. And somewhere out there on Highway 87, on other lonely roads across this country, the black dog is still appearing to exhausted drivers, still making them slow down and pay attention, still standing between them and the accidents that claim lives every single night. Imagine hauling a sealed trailer across 3 states, and halfway through the journey, you start hearing screaming from inside, screaming that stops every time you slow down and starts again when you accelerate. Would you break the seal and look inside, knowing it could destroy your career? Or would you keep driving and try to ignore what you're hearing? There are rules in this industry that you don't break, lines you don't cross no matter what. One of the biggest is this. If you're hauling a sealed trailer, you don't open it. You don't ask what's inside, you don't inspect the cargo, you just drive from point A to point B and let the receiver handle the unsealing. Break that seal and you're liable for everything. Theft, tampering, contamination, you name it. Your career is over, your reputation destroyed, and you might face criminal charges depending on what's inside. I understood these rules. I'd followed them religiously for 9 years. But what happened on a run from Boise to Denver last November made me break every rule I'd ever learned. And I still don't know if I made the right choice. The job came through a broker I'd worked with before, decent rates for a straightforward haul. Refrigerated trailer, sealed at origin, medical supplies, and laboratory equipment according to the manifest. The client was a private research firm, the kind that pays well for discretion and no questions. I'd hauled for them twice before without incident. Both times it was legitimate cargo, properly documented, nothing unusual. This run seemed the same. I picked up the trailer at their facility outside Boise, did my standard inspection of the exterior, verified the seal number matched my paperwork, and hit the road. The first 8 hours were completely normal. I drove through Idaho into Utah, stopped for fuel and food, made good time. The refrigeration unit was running perfectly, holding a steady 38 degrees according to the external monitor. Everything was by the book. It wasn't until I was deep into the Utah backcountry, somewhere between Price and Green River on Highway 6, that I first heard it. A sound coming from the trailer. Faint at first, barely audible over the road noise and the hum of the refrigeration unit. I thought maybe it was mechanical, a loose panel or rattling equipment. But as I listened more carefully, my blood went cold. It sounded like screaming. I turned down the radio, rolled up my window, focused on the sound. It would come in waves, building to a peak, then fading away, then building again. Sometimes it sounded human, sometimes animal, sometimes like nothing I could identify. And the pattern was strange. It seemed to match the rhythm of my driving, getting louder when I accelerated, quieter when I slowed down. I told myself it was the refrigeration unit, some mechanical issue creating acoustic illusions. Compressors can make weird noises. Airflow through vents can sound like voices if you're tired enough. I'd been driving for 9 hours straight. My mind was playing tricks. But the sound persisted. Mile after mile, that screaming coming from behind me, trapped inside a sealed trailer I couldn't open. I pulled over at a rest area and did a thorough walk around, checking every panel, every vent, every access point. The trailer was secure. The seal was intact. The refrigeration unit showed no error codes. The external temperature reading was steady at 38 degrees. Everything looked perfect. But when I pressed my ear against the trailer wall, I could hear it more clearly. Screaming, crying, sounds of distress that made my stomach turn. I got back in the cab and called the broker. Got voicemail. Left a message explaining the situation, asking for contact information for the client. No response. I tried the client's main number from my previous runs. That number was disconnected. I searched online for the research firm's name. Nothing came up. Not their website, not any business listings, nothing. It was like they'd never existed. My unease shifted to genuine fear. What the hell was I hauling? I stood next to my truck in that rest area for 20 minutes, having an internal argument with myself. Opening that seal meant ending my career. But what if there was something alive in there? What if someone was hurt, trapped, dying? The manifest said medical supplies and laboratory equipment. But manifests can be faked. People smuggle all kinds of things in sealed trailers: drugs, weapons, contraband. Sometimes they smuggle people. Human trafficking is real, and truckers who ask too many questions sometimes become accessories to crimes they didn't know they were committing. The screaming started again, louder this time, and I could swear I heard words underneath the distorted sounds. Help. Please. Let me out. My hands were shaking as I walked to the back of the trailer. The seals stared at me. That little plastic band with its unique number, the only thing standing between me and answers. I took out my knife. Just to look, I told myself. Just to verify the cargo matches the manifest. If everything's legitimate, I can explain the broken seal as a safety check. If it's not legitimate, I call the police and let them handle it. I cut the seal. The plastic band fell away, and I stood there with my hand on the latch, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The screaming had stopped the moment I cut the seal, like whatever was inside knew I was about to open it. The silence was somehow worse than the screaming. I pulled the latch and swung the door open, my flashlight ready, my phone in my other hand with 911 already dialed, just needing me to hit send. The trailer was empty. Completely, utterly empty. No medical supplies, no laboratory equipment, no cargo of any kind. Just bare walls and an empty floor, lit by the interior light of the refrigeration unit. The temperature hit me immediately. It was cold, but not refrigerator cold. More like freezer cold, maybe 10 degrees, though the external monitor had been reading 38. Frost covered the interior walls in strange patterns that almost looked deliberate, like writing or symbols. And the smell, God, the smell! Metallic and organic, like a slaughterhouse mixed with a hospital. I climbed into the trailer, my breath fogging in the cold air, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The walls showed no signs of recent cargo, no tie-down marks, no scuff marks, no indication anything had ever been transported inside. But there were stains on the floor. Dark stains that could be rust or could be something else. And scratches on the walls, long gouges in the metal that looked like they'd been made by fingernails or claws, clustered around the door area like something had been desperately trying to get out. I moved deeper into the trailer, and that's when I found them. In the far corner, barely visible in the shadows, were clothes. A jacket, a pair of work boots, a backpack. Human belongings, arranged almost carefully, like someone had taken them off and folded them. I approached slowly, not wanting to disturb what might be evidence of a crime. The jacket was old, weathered, covered in frost. The backpack was partially open and I could see a wallet inside. My hands were completely numb, and not just from the cold, as I reached for that wallet. The ID inside showed a man named David Pearson, age 41, from Spokane, Washington. The license had expired 3 years ago. I searched the name on my phone. Signal was weak, but eventually the page loaded. David Pearson had been a trucker. He disappeared in 2021 while hauling a load from Boise to Denver. His truck was found abandoned at a rest area in Utah, trailer still attached, seal intact. He was never found. The case went cold after 6 months. I backed out of the trailer so fast I almost fell. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd discovered. This trailer, the same route, the same origin and destination, a sealed trailer that contained the belongings of a missing driver from 3 years ago. And the screaming that had led me to open it, to discover this. I called 911 with shaking hands, told them where I was, told them I'd found evidence related to a missing person case. They said they'd send someone immediately. While I waited for the police, I did something stupid. I went back to the clothes and searched the jacket pockets. Inside, I found a small notebook, the kind drivers use for personal logs. The pages were brittle with cold but readable. The last entry was dated November 18th, 2021. It read, "Something wrong with this load. Hearing sounds from the trailer. Broker won't answer. Client doesn't exist. Going to open it. If you're reading this and I'm gone, don't trust any job from Cascade Research Partners. They're not real. This is a trap. Whatever they're transporting, it's not." The entry ended there. The rest of the pages were blank, except for one final page. At the very back, written in a different pen, shakier handwriting. "It's in here with me. They sealed me inside. I can hear it breathing. If anyone finds this, tell my family I tried to get out. Tell them I'm sorry." The police arrived 40 minutes later. I showed them everything. The trailer, the belongings, the notebook. They took statements, photographed evidence, called in investigators. The story made regional news. Missing truckers' belongings found in trailer. Investigation reopened. But what the news didn't report, what the police asked me not to discuss, was what the forensic team found when they examined that trailer more carefully. There were traces of blood on the walls and floor. Not just David Pearson's blood, but 5 different people's blood. 5 different DNA profiles belonging to 5 different missing truckers, all of whom had disappeared over the past 7 years while hauling sealed trailers on this same route. The research firm, Cascade Research Partners, doesn't exist and never has. The address on the paperwork leads to an empty lot. The broker who set up the job has vanished. Phone disconnected, office abandoned, no forwarding information. And here's what keeps me awake at night. The manifest for my load showed medical supplies and laboratory equipment. But when I opened that trailer, it was empty. Empty except for evidence of 5 murders. Which means whatever was supposed to be in there, whatever I was actually transporting, was removed before I picked it up. Or it was never there at all. Or something was there and I just couldn't see it. The refrigeration unit's internal logs showed something the external monitor didn't. The temperature inside that trailer had been fluctuating wildly for hours before I opened it, spiking to 90 degrees, dropping to 0, cycling through extremes that should have triggered alarms. And during those temperature spikes, the unit's microphone picked up sounds. The manufacturer includes audio sensors to detect mechanical failures. When the police analyzed those recordings, they found voices. Dozens of voices, overlapping, crying out, calling for help in a loop that had been playing for years. David Pearson's voice was on there. So were the other missing drivers. All of them screaming, all of them trapped somehow in that trailer, in that space, in that cold metal box that I'd been pulling behind me for 8 hours. I don't haul sealed trailers anymore. I don't care how good the money is or how legitimate the client seems. I've learned that some cargo isn't meant to be transported, and some trailers are prisons for things we're not supposed to understand. 5 drivers before me made the mistake of getting curious, of opening the seal to investigate strange sounds. And they never made it home. I was the sixth. The only difference is I opened it at a rest area with my truck stopped and people around. The others opened it while driving, while isolated, while vulnerable. And somehow, in ways I can't explain and don't want to understand, the trailer took them. David Pearson's family got closure at least. They could bury his belongings, could mark his death as confirmed instead of missing. The other families received the same grim gift. But nobody can explain what happened to those men, how they ended up sealed inside an empty trailer, or why their voices continued to scream for years after they disappeared. The investigation is ongoing, though I doubt it will find answers. Some horrors don't have explanations. Some roads claim victims for reasons beyond human understanding. What would you do if you drove past the same billboard, the same mile marker, the same crooked fence post 6 times in a row on a straight highway with your GPS showing normal progress? Would you keep driving hoping to break free? Or would you stop and risk being trapped in that loop forever? I'm going to tell you about the worst night of my life, a night that lasted far longer than any night should. I'm a rational person. I believe in physics, in cause and effect, in the measurable reality of time and space. But on a cold February evening on Highway 36 through Kansas, reality stopped making sense, and I learned that some roads don't follow the rules we think govern the universe. What I experienced challenges everything I thought I understood about how the world works. And even now, 4 months later, I can't fully explain what happened or why I was able to escape when others apparently haven't. It started normally enough. I was hauling agricultural equipment from Kansas City to Denver, running about an hour ahead of schedule. The weather was clear, traffic was light, and I was in good spirits. Highway 36 across Kansas is one of those roads that tests your ability to stay focused. Perfectly straight, perfectly flat, with mile after mile of farmland stretching to the horizon. At night, it's even more monotonous because there's nothing to see except your own headlights and the occasional farmhouse light in the distance. I'd driven this route probably 50 times over my 7 years of trucking. I knew every town, every landmark, every quirk of the road. At approximately 9:47 p.m., according to my dashboard clock, I passed mile marker 118. I remember it specifically because there's a distinctive billboard just past it, advertising a steakhouse in a town 30 miles ahead. And I was thinking about stopping there for dinner. The billboard shows a cartoon cow wearing a cowboy hat. And it's so weathered and faded, it's become a landmark for drivers who run this route regularly. I noted the mile marker, saw the billboard, and kept driving at my usual 70 miles per hour. 4 minutes later, at 9:51 p.m., I passed mile marker 118 again. Same marker, same position, same faded steakhouse billboard with the cartoon cow. My first reaction was confusion. Had I misread the number? But no, I'd been paying attention. I'd definitely passed 118 and should be at 122 or 123 by now. I checked my GPS, and it showed me progressing normally along Highway 36, approaching mile marker 123. But the physical road signs said 118. I chalked it up to a duplicate marker, maybe some road crew error. Kansas DOT had been doing maintenance on this stretch. Maybe they'd temporarily placed markers in wrong positions. I kept driving. 4 minutes later, at 9:55 p.m., I passed mile marker 118 again. Same position, same billboard, same everything. This time my confusion shifted to concern. I looked more carefully at the surroundings, checking for distinctive features. There was a crooked fence post about 100 yards past the mile marker, leaning at a 45-degree angle. There was a slight rise in the road just before the marker. There was a reflector on the sign that was partially missing. These weren't general features. They were specific, unique details, and I was seeing them for the third time. My GPS still showed normal progress. According to the screen, I was at mile marker 127 and making steady advancement toward my destination. My odometer was clicking off miles normally. My speedometer held steady at 70. All my instruments indicated I was moving forward through space exactly as I should be. But the physical world outside my window kept repeating the same 4-minute segment of highway. At 9:59 p.m., I passed mile marker 118 for the fourth time. I grabbed my CB radio and called out, hoping another driver might be in range. "This is eastbound 36. Anyone copy? I'm having a strange situation here. Looking for confirmation on current location." Static answered me. I tried again on several channels. Nothing but empty static, though this stretch of highway usually has decent CB traffic from long-haul drivers crossing the country. I decided to test something. When mile marker 118 appeared for the fifth time at 10:03 p.m., I took my foot completely off the accelerator and started coasting, watching my speed drop from 70 to 60 to 50. The mile marker approached and passed. I watched my odometer. It showed mileage accumulating normally. I watched the GPS. It showed me progressing along the highway. But I knew with absolute certainty that in 4 minutes I would see that marker again. At 10:07 p.m., doing only 30 miles per hour now, I passed mile marker 118 for the sixth time. The repetition was perfect. Exactly the same. The crooked fence post, the rise in the road, the damaged reflector, the faded billboard. I was trapped in a loop, a 4-minute segment of highway that repeated endlessly no matter how fast or slow I drove. My instrument said I was covering distance, but physical reality said I wasn't going anywhere at all. Panic started setting in. I'd heard stories about stretches of highway where drivers disappeared, roads that seemed to swallow vehicles whole. But I'd always dismissed them as urban legends or accidents misinterpreted as something mysterious. Now I was living one of those stories, and the rational explanations I'd always relied on weren't helping. I tried my cell phone. No signal, which wasn't unusual for rural Kansas. I tried my satellite communicator. It showed my position as steadily progressing along Highway 36, contradicting what I was experiencing. At 10:11 p.m., 7th repetition. I noticed something new this time. The dashboard clock was still advancing. I could watch the minutes tick by. But when I looked at my phone, the time was frozen at 9:47, the exact moment I'd entered this loop. My truck's clock said I'd been driving for 24 minutes since first passing mile, marker 1:18. My phone said no time had passed at all. I was moving through time but not through space, or moving through space according to my instruments, but trapped in a temporal loop according to the physical world. The contradiction made my head hurt. I grabbed my CB again, and this time I heard something besides static. Voices, faint and distorted like signals from very far away. I turned up the volume and listened carefully. The voices were calling out, asking for help, describing the same situation I was in. "Stuck on 36. Keep passing the same marker. Been driving for hours. Can't get past mile 118. Anyone hear me? I'm trapped in some kind of loop." The voices overlapped. Dozens of them, all saying variations of the same thing. All trapped on this same stretch of highway, all experiencing the same impossible repetition. At 10:15 p.m., 8th repetition. My fuel gauge became my biggest concern. I'd entered the loop with 3/4 of a tank, and it was dropping normally, according to the gauge. If fuel consumption was real but distance traveled wasn't, I would eventually run out of gas while still trapped in this 4-minute segment. And based on the voices I'd heard on the CB, Running out of fuel while trapped in the loop might be the point where the loop became permanent. Maybe the trucks I occasionally saw abandoned on the shoulder of Highway 36. The ones that looked like they'd been sitting for years. Maybe those drivers had been trapped in loops of their own, repeating the same moments over and over until their fuel ran out, and they became permanent fixtures in their own private eternities. At 10:19 p.m., 9th repetition. I tried something desperate. Instead of driving past the mile marker, I stopped directly beside it. Maybe the loop triggered when you passed a certain point. Maybe staying still would break it. I pulled onto the shoulder and put the truck in park, leaving the engine running. The world outside looked normal. Dark highway, empty fields, distant farmhouse lights. But the air felt wrong. Heavy and thick, like driving through humidity, even though it was a cold February night. I sat there for 10 minutes by my truck's clock, though my phone's frozen display still read 9:47. Nothing changed. The highway remained empty. No traffic passed in either direction, which was unusual even at night. Then, at exactly 10:29 p.m., I felt a lurch, like the truck had been pushed or pulled. The mile marker I'd been sitting next to was suddenly ahead of me again, approaching in my headlights as if I'd been driving toward it all along. The loop had reset with me inside it, repositioning me to the starting point. 10th repetition at 10:33 p.m. I made a decision based on the only pattern I could identify. The loop was 4 minutes long. Every 4 minutes, reality reset to mile marker 118. My instruments showed normal progress, but the physical world contradicted them. What if the key was to trust neither the instruments nor the physical markers, but something else? What if I needed to break the pattern not by driving differently, but by perceiving differently? At 10:37 p.m., as the 11th repetition began, I closed my eyes, kept them closed while maintaining steady speed and straight heading on a road I knew was empty. I drove blind through that 4-minute segment, trusting only my sense of time and direction, refusing to look at the mile marker or the billboard or any of the physical landmarks. When 4 minutes had passed by my internal count, I opened my eyes. Mile marker 119. Different billboard, different landscape. I'd broken through. I kept driving, hardly daring to believe it, watching the mile markers advance, 120, 121, 122. The highway was normal again. My phone's clock suddenly jumped forward, catching up to my truck's clock in a dizzying lurch of temporal adjustment. The CB radio crackled with normal traffic. I'd escaped. But here's what haunts me. When I checked my fuel gauge after breaking free, it showed nearly empty. I'd entered the loop with 3/4 of a tank. I'd been trapped for less than an hour, according to any clock. But my fuel level indicated I'd been driving for at least 4 hours, maybe more. And when I finally stopped at a gas station in the next town, the attendant looked at my truck oddly and asked if I'd been driving through bad weather. My truck was covered in dust and grime like I'd driven through a sandstorm, though the night had been clear. The tires showed wear consistent with significantly more mileage than my odometer indicated. I reported my experience to the Kansas Highway Patrol. They were polite but clearly skeptical, suggested fatigue-induced confusion. When I mentioned hearing other drivers' voices on the CB, voices of people trapped in similar loops, they said they'd check missing person reports. 3 days later, a detective called me. They'd found something. A truck had been discovered abandoned on the shoulder of Highway 36, right at mile marker 118. The driver was missing. The truck's engine was running, fuel tank empty. But there was no sign of where the driver had gone. The odometer showed the truck had been driven less than 100 miles. But the engine wear and tire degradation suggested thousands of miles. The dashboard clock was running normally. The driver's phone, found in the cab, showed a frozen time, 9:47 p.m. They asked if I knew anything about it. I told them I didn't, which was technically true. I didn't know the driver. I didn't know what happened to him. But I knew where he was. He was still there, still trapped at mile marker 118, driving through a 4-minute loop that would repeat forever, or until he figured out the same trick I had. Closing his eyes, refusing to see the markers, breaking the pattern by denying its reality. I've driven Highway 36 twice since then, both times during daylight. Mile marker 118 looks completely normal. The faded billboard is still there. The crooked fence post stands at its odd angle. But I don't drive that route at night anymore. Because I know now that some roads have glitches, places where the normal flow of space and time gets stuck in a loop, trapping anyone unlucky enough to enter at the wrong moment. And based on those voices I heard on the CB, dozens of drivers have been caught in loops on highways across the country, repeating the same segments of road forever, their instruments telling them they're making progress, while reality holds them prisoner. My truck still shows the effects of that night. Excessive wear that can't be explained by the mileage driven. A persistent smell of ozone in the cab. And sometimes, late at night, my CB will crackle to life, even when it's turned off, and I'll hear those voices again. Drivers calling out from their loops, trapped in moments that repeat endlessly, asking if anyone can hear them, begging for help that I don't know how to give. What if you walked into a truck stop and saw yourself already sitting there, drinking coffee, wearing the same clothes, with an identical truck parked outside? Would you approach your double? Or would you run before it noticed you? Identity is something we take for granted until it's challenged. We assume we're singular, unique, the only version of ourselves that exists. But what happens when that fundamental assumption proves false? What happens when you come face to face with yourself and realize that maybe, just maybe, you're not as unique as you thought? This happened to me at a Flying J truck stop in Tennessee 3 months ago. And I still don't know which version of me walked out of that place. I still don't know if I'm the original or the copy. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 42 years old, been driving trucks for 14 years, run mostly southern routes between Texas and the Carolinas. I have a scar on my left hand from a childhood accident with a lawnmower, a tattoo of my daughter's name on my right forearm, and a habit of tapping my wedding ring against the steering wheel when I'm thinking. These details matter because they're how I identify myself, how I know I'm me and not someone else. Or at least, they used to be how I knew. It was a Tuesday morning in early March, around 6 a.m. I'd been driving since midnight, hauling electronics from Memphis to Charlotte, and needed to stop for fuel and breakfast. The Flying J outside of Jackson was one of my regular stops. I knew the layout, knew which pump was fastest, knew the waitress who worked the morning shift usually had the coffee fresh by 6. Routine, familiar, safe. I pulled in, parked my Peterbilt in the back row like always, and headed inside. The place was moderately busy for that hour. Maybe a dozen other truckers scattered around the restaurant area, a few drivers paying for fuel at the counter. Normal truck stop morning crowd. I grabbed a cup of coffee from the dispenser and turned toward the seating area to find a booth. That's when I saw him. Saw me. Sitting at the counter, wearing the same red flannel shirt I was wearing, the same jeans, the same boots. Same build, same posture, same everything. He had his back to me, but I could see his reflection in the mirror behind the counter. And it was my face. My exact face. My first thought was twin. Maybe I had a twin I didn't know about, separated at birth or something. But as I stood there staring, Frozen with my coffee cup halfway to my mouth, I saw details that made that explanation impossible. The man at the counter raised his left hand to signal the waitress, and I saw the scar. The exact same lawnmower scar on the left hand. He reached for his coffee with his right hand, and the motion revealed a tattoo on his forearm. My daughter's name. Emma. In the same script, same position, same everything. I must have made a sound because he turned around. Our eyes met across the truck stop restaurant, and I watched recognition and shock flash across his face, my face. We stared at each other for what felt like an hour but was probably only 5 seconds. Then he stood up slowly, and I could see he was matching my height exactly, moving the way I move, with the same slight limp in my right leg from an old accident. He was me. Not similar. Not a look-alike. Me. The other truckers in the restaurant started noticing. Conversation stopped. A driver at a nearby booth stood up and backed away, his expression shifting from confusion to fear. The waitress I knew, Sarah, looked between the two of us with her mouth open, the coffee pot in her hand tilting dangerously like she'd forgotten she was holding it. The whole place went silent, except for the country music playing from the speakers and the distant sound of diesel engines outside. "Who the hell are you?" My voice and his voice asked the question simultaneously, the exact same words, in the exact same tone. We both took a step forward. We both stopped at the same moment. It was like looking in a mirror, except the reflection was three-dimensional and moving independently. Sort of. Because we weren't moving independently, we were moving in sync, thinking the same thoughts, reacting the same ways. I tried to think of something only I would know, some way to prove I was the real Marcus Webb, and he was, what? A clone? A doppelganger? Some kind of supernatural duplicate? "What's my daughter's birthday?" I demanded. He answered before I finished the question. "July 14th, 2014. She was born at 3:17 a.m. at Baptist Memorial Hospital. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Emma Grace Webb." Perfect accuracy. The exact details I would have given. "What's my wife's name?" Another test. Another simultaneous answer. "Jennifer Marie. Maiden name Harrison. Married August 23rd, 2008, at her parents' church in Little Rock. She wore her grandmother's wedding dress." Still perfect. Still identical. I tried something more obscure. "What happened in Spokane in 2019? His face, my face, showed the same flash of guilt and regret I would have shown. "We don't talk about Spokane. Nobody knows about Spokane." The exact response I would have given, complete with the same emphasis on the same words. A trucker I recognized from other stops, guy named Raymond, approached us cautiously. "What the hell is going on here? Which one of you is the real Marcus?" We both turned to him. We both said, "I am." Raymond backed up fast, nearly tripping over a chair. "This ain't right. This ain't natural. I'm calling the cops." That snapped me out of my shocked paralysis. "No, don't call anyone. I don't know what this is, but bringing cops into it won't help." The other me nodded. He's right. We need to figure this out ourselves. We were agreeing with each other, finishing each other's thoughts, moving in unconscious synchronization. Sarah, the waitress, set down her coffee pot with shaking hands. "Marcus, I don't know which one you are, but you've been sitting at that counter for the past 2 hours, since 4 a.m. You told me you got here around 3:30, parked, and came straight in." I shook my head. "That's impossible. I just got here. I pulled in 5 minutes ago." But even as I said it, doubt crept in. I checked my phone for the time. 6:07 a.m. I checked my last GPS checkpoint. It showed I'd arrived at this Flying J at 3:42 a.m. over 2 hours ago. But I didn't remember that. I remembered driving through the night, arriving just a few minutes ago, walking in and seeing myself. The other me was checking his phone too, his expression showing the same confusion I felt. My GPS says the same thing. Arrived at 3:42. But I remember getting here just now, right before you walked in. We looked at each other, and I could see my own growing horror reflected in his face. Neither of us remembered the time between 3:42 a.m. and now. Both of us thought we'd just arrived. Both of us had perfect memories of driving through the night, identical routes, identical thoughts, identical experiences. But one of us had been here for 2 hours, sitting at that counter, existing and interacting with people while having no memory of it. "Your truck," I said suddenly. "Which one is yours?" We both pointed toward the parking lot. And then we both walked toward the door, moving in sync like we were connected by invisible strings. Outside in the gray pre-dawn light, we could see the trucks lined up in rows. I pointed to mine, or what I thought was mine. Red Peterbilt 579, custom paint job, license plate ending in 847. He pointed to the exact same truck, same position in the lot, same everything. We walked to it together, our boots hitting the pavement in rhythm. I pulled out my key fob. So did he. We both pressed the unlock button. The truck's lights flashed. Both our fobs had worked. I opened the driver's door and looked inside. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. My logbook, my travel mug with coffee still warm in it, the air freshener hanging from the mirror, my sunglasses in the holder. He was looking over my shoulder, and I heard him make a sound of recognition because it was all his stuff too, or mine, or ours. "Check the trailer," someone said. I turned to see that several truckers had followed us outside, watching this impossible situation unfold. Raymond was among them, his phone out, recording everything. I didn't care anymore about being recorded. I just needed answers. We walked to the back of the truck together, our movements still synchronized, and checked the trailer number against our paperwork. It matched. We were both hauling the same load of electronics to Charlotte. Same client, same delivery time, same everything. The other me spoke first. "This doesn't make sense. We can't both be real. One of us has to be, what, a copy? A hallucination?" I shook my head. I feel real. I have all my memories, all my thoughts. I'm Marcus Webb. I know I'm Marcus Webb. He nodded slowly. "So do I. I'm not a copy. I'm the original. I'm real." We stared at each other, and the question hung between us. If we're both real, both convinced we're the original, how do we determine which one is telling the truth? Sarah had come outside too. "The Marcus I've been serving coffee to for the past 2 hours. You seem normal. We talked about your daughter's upcoming birthday, about the weather, about roots. You were just you. Normal Marcus who stops here every week." She looked between us, unable to determine which one she'd been talking to. "You both look exactly the same to me. Sound exactly the same. I couldn't tell you apart if my life depended on it." Another trucker, woman named Diane, spoke up. "I passed one of you in the parking lot around 4 a.m., nodded hello. You, whoever you were, nodded back. That was over 2 hours ago." She looked at me, then at him. "But I can't say which one it was. You're absolutely identical." The implications started hitting me like physical blows. If he'd been here since 3:42 a.m., interacting with people, being seen and remembered, then maybe he was the original, and I was the copy who'd just appeared with false memories of driving through the night. But I felt real. My memories felt real. I could remember every mile of the drive, every thought I'd had, every song on the radio. How could those memories be false if they felt so genuine? "We need to see a doctor," the other me said. "Or a scientist, someone who can test us, figure out what's happening." I agreed. But even as I did, I realized the problem. We couldn't both show up claiming to be the same person. One of us would be declared an imposter, possibly arrested, definitely questioned. Our lives, my life, would be destroyed by investigation and suspicion. And we both knew it because we both thought the same way. "One of us needs to leave," I said quietly. He nodded, understanding immediately. "We can't both exist in the same space. It's not sustainable. One of us has to take the truck and continue the route. The other has to..." He trailed off because neither of us knew what the other should do. Disappear? Hide? Try to build a new identity? We stood there in that parking lot surrounded by witnesses, two identical men making an impossible decision. Finally, I spoke. "I'll go. I'll take the truck and finish the delivery. You figure out what to do." He looked relieved and guilty at the same time. "Are you sure?" I wasn't sure at all, but I nodded. "Yeah, I'm sure. Maybe I was the copy. Maybe I was the one who didn't belong. Maybe letting the other me continue living our life was the right choice." I climbed into the truck, started the engine, and pulled out of the Flying J without looking back. In my mirror, I could see him standing in the parking lot, watching me go, surrounded by confused truckers trying to make sense of what they'd witnessed. I drove for 3 hours before I pulled over at another truck stop and really processed what had happened. I'd met myself. I'd met another version of me who was identical in every way, who had equal claim to being Marcus Webb. And I'd voluntarily given up my life, my identity, my existence so he could continue. But here's what keeps me awake at night. What if I made the wrong choice? What if I was the original and he was the copy, and I just handed my entire life over to an imposter? What if Jennifer is living with a version of me that isn't really me? What if Emma is being raised by someone who looks like her father, but isn't? I completed the delivery to Charlotte. I've continued driving, continued living as Marcus Webb. But I don't call home anymore. I don't know what I'd say. I don't know if the Marcus Webb who answers has always been there, or if he's the one who appeared at a Flying J in Tennessee and took over a life that wasn't his. Sometimes I wonder if there are more of us. If somewhere else on the highway, another Marcus Webb is driving another identical truck, convinced he's the original, unaware that he shares existence with multiple versions of himself. Maybe we're all copies. Maybe the original Marcus Webb disappeared years ago, and we're just echoes, replications that spring into being at random moments. Each one convinced they're real. Each one living a life that feels genuine, but might be nothing more than a sophisticated copy. I saw my reflection in a gas station window yesterday and didn't recognize myself for a moment. Had to check my scar, my tattoo, my wedding ring to confirm I was still me. Still Marcus Webb. Still the person I've always been. But the doubt never fully goes away, because I know now that identity isn't as solid as we think. I know that somewhere in Tennessee there's another me living my life, and I can't prove I have any more right to exist than he does. Imagine driving into a fog bank that doesn't just obscure your vision, but projects your worst memories onto the mist like a movie screen, forcing you to relive every mistake and regret. Would you push through knowing each mile brings more painful revelations? Or would you try to back out blind into the darkness behind you? Guilt is a weight we carry invisibly, buried so deep sometimes we forget it's there until something forces us to confront it. For 15 years, I've been running from memories I didn't want to face. Driving long-haul routes that kept me moving, kept me distracted, kept me from having to sit still with my thoughts. But on a foggy night in the Appalachian Mountains, the past caught up with me in a way I never could have imagined. What happened on that mountain road changed me fundamentally, forced me to confront things I'd spent over a decade trying to forget, and taught me that some roads demand payment in confession before they'll let you pass. I'm not going to give you my name because what I'm about to tell you includes admissions I've never made to anyone. Secrets that could destroy what's left of my relationships if the wrong people heard them. What I will tell you is that I'm 51 years old. I've been driving trucks since I was 35. And before that, I had a different life, a different career, a different version of myself that I left behind for reasons that seemed justified at the time, but have haunted me ever since. It was late October, around 10 p.m., and I was hauling furniture from North Carolina through the mountains toward Tennessee. Route 421 through the Appalachians is beautiful during the day, but treacherous at night, especially when weather rolls in. I'd driven it dozens of times and knew the curves, knew where to be careful, knew which stretches required extra attention. But I'd never driven it in fog like what I encountered that night. It appeared suddenly, a wall of white that materialized across the highway with no warning. One moment I had clear visibility, the next I was engulfed in fog so thick my headlights barely penetrated 3 feet ahead. I slowed to a crawl, maybe 15 miles per hour, my hands tight on the wheel, every sense alert for the road ahead. The fog wasn't moving like fog should. It hung motionless, dense, and somehow purposeful, like it was waiting for something. That's when I started seeing images in it. At first I thought it was pareidolia, the human tendency to see patterns and faces in random shapes. The fog would swirl and I'd catch glimpses of what looked like scenes or pictures, vague and indistinct. But as I continued driving deeper into it, the images became clearer, more detailed, more specific, and I started recognizing what I was seeing. The first clear image appeared directly ahead of me, projected onto the fog like it was a screen. A hospital room. I knew that room. I'd spent 3 days in it 16 years ago when my father was dying of cancer. The fog showed me the moment I'd walked out, told him I needed to get coffee, promised I'd be right back. I never went back. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 2 hours, too afraid to face his death, too cowardly to be there when he needed me most. He died alone while I sat 3 floors below, and I've never forgiven myself for it. The image was perfect, detailed, showing things I'd forgotten or tried to forget. The exact pattern on the hospital curtains, the way the afternoon light came through the window. My father's face, thin and gray, watching me leave. The fog held the image for maybe 30 seconds, long enough for me to feel the full weight of that abandonment. Then it dissolved and reformed into something else. A different scene, a parking lot behind a bar. I recognized this one too, though I'd tried for years to bury it. This was from my previous life, before trucking, when I was a police officer in a small town in Ohio. The fog showed me a night I'd found a kid, maybe 19 years old, passed out drunk next to his car with keys in his hand. Policy said I should arrest him, take him in for public intoxication and attempted DUI. But it was late, I was tired, and the kid looked like someone who just made a stupid mistake rather than a genuine threat. So I drove him home, told him to sleep it off, said he was lucky I was the one who found him. The fog showed me what happened next, something I didn't witness but learned about later. The kid, instead of staying home like I'd told him, went back for his car an hour later. Still drunk, still impaired, but conscious enough to drive. He made it 3 miles before he crossed the center line and hit another car head-on. Killed a woman named Patricia Hernandez, 34 years old, mother of 2. If I'd arrested him like I should have, she'd still be alive. But I'd made a judgment call, shown mercy where policy dictated otherwise, and it cost an innocent woman her life. I'd quit the force 6 months after that. Couldn't face the uniform anymore, couldn't make traffic stops without wondering if I was making the right call. Became a trucker because it meant being alone, meant not having to make decisions that affected other people's lives. But the guilt followed me, and now the fog was forcing me to watch it all play out again in perfect detail. More images came, faster now, each one a moment of shame or regret, pulled from my memory and displayed in the fog. A marriage that failed because I was emotionally absent, too wrapped up in my own guilt and self-pity to be a real partner. The moment I learned I had a daughter I'd never met because I'd walked away from a relationship before I knew about the pregnancy. Arguments with my mother where I'd said cruel things I could never take back. Professional failures, personal betrayals, every mistake, every moment of weakness, every time I'd chosen the easy path over the right one. The fog seemed to feed on these memories, growing thicker and more oppressive with each revelation. The temperature dropped until I could see my breath, until frost started forming on the inside of my windshield, despite the heater running full blast. I tried to drive faster, to push through and escape whatever this was, but the images came faster too, matching my speed, overwhelming me with guilt and shame and regret. I saw myself at my mother's funeral, dry-eyed and distant because I'd numbed myself to emotion years before. I saw the face of my ex-wife the last time we spoke, the disappointment and sadness that I'd caused. I saw my daughter's name in a birthday card I'd never sent, the gift I'd bought but never delivered, because I was too afraid of rejection to reach out. Every failure of character, every moment of cowardice, every time I'd chosen my comfort over doing the right thing. The worst image came about 20 minutes into the fog. It showed me a conversation I'd had with Patricia Hernandez's husband at the trial of the drunk kid I'd let go. He'd looked at me in the courthouse hallway after testifying about losing his wife, and he'd asked if there was anything that could have prevented it, any chance his wife could have been saved. I'd lied to his face, told him no, told him it was just a tragic accident, told him nobody could have predicted it. The fog showed me that lie in perfect clarity, showed me his grief and my cowardice, showed me choosing my own protection over his right to know the truth. I don't know if I was crying or if the condensation on my face was from the fog, but my vision was blurred and my chest felt like it was being crushed. The memories weren't just visual anymore. I could feel them, relive the emotions, experience the shame and guilt as fresh as the day they happened. It was unbearable. I wanted to stop, to turn around, to escape this road that was forcing me to confront everything I'd spent 15 years running from. But I couldn't turn around. The fog behind me was just as thick as the fog ahead, and backing up a semi on a mountain road was suicide, even in clear conditions. I had to go forward. I had to keep driving through these memories, keep facing these moments I'd tried to bury. The fog gave me no choice. Another image appeared, and this one broke something in me. It showed my daughter, now 15 years old according to the date the fog somehow conveyed. I'd never met her, never reached out beyond a few child support payments arranged through lawyers. The fog showed me her face, showed me a girl who had my eyes and her mother's smile, showed me a life I'd chosen not to be part of. And then the image shifted, showed me her asking her mother about me, asking why her father didn't want to know her. Showed my ex-partner lying, making excuses for me, protecting our daughter from the truth that her father was simply too broken and too cowardly to face his responsibilities. Something shifted in me at that moment. Maybe it was the accumulated weight of all the memories. Or maybe it was seeing the direct impact of my choices on an innocent person who'd done nothing to deserve my abandonment. But I stopped trying to escape the fog. I stopped fighting the memories. I started watching them fully, accepting them, acknowledging every moment of failure without excuse or justification. The fog responded. The images became less accusatory, more reflective. Instead of just showing my failures, it started showing context. The fear I'd felt watching my father die, the terror of losing the person who defined so much of my life. The exhaustion and burnout that had clouded my judgment the night I let that kid go. The depression and trauma that had made me emotionally unavailable in my marriage. The fog wasn't excusing these failures, but it was showing me the whole picture, helping me understand the person I'd been in those moments. I realized the fog wasn't punishing me. It was offering something different, an opportunity for honest self-examination, a chance to face everything I'd been running from. The memories were painful, but avoidance had been more painful in its own way, a constant background radiation of unprocessed guilt that had poisoned 15 years of my life. I started talking out loud, addressing the fog, addressing the memories, addressing myself. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice hoarse. "I'm sorry I wasn't there when Dad died. I'm sorry I made the wrong call that night and Patricia Hernandez paid for my mistake. I'm sorry I failed Sarah in our marriage. I'm sorry I abandoned my daughter. I'm sorry for all of it." The confessions poured out of me, every regret and failure spoken aloud for the first time. And as I spoke, the fog began to thin, not disappear, but become less dense, less oppressive. The images continued, but they were gentler now, showing not just my failures, but moments where I'd tried, where I'd done the right thing even when it was hard, small acts of kindness and integrity that I'd forgotten in my focus on my mistakes. The fog showed me staying with a homeless veteran at a rest stop until paramedics arrived for his medical emergency. Showed me helping a stranded driver change a tire in dangerous conditions. Showed me the letters I'd written to Patricia Hernandez's family but never sent. Apologies and explanations I'd been too afraid to share. Showed me the birthday cards and gifts I'd bought for my daughter over the years. Tangible evidence that even in my avoidance, I thought of her, cared about her. I drove for what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes. The fog gradually released me, thinning from impenetrable white to wispy tendrils, to finally just normal mountain mist. When I emerged on the other side, the highway was clear, and I could see the lights of a small town ahead. I pulled into a truck stop, parked, and sat in my cab shaking for a long time. I made phone calls that night, called my ex-partner for the first time in 15 years. Had a conversation that was awkward and painful, but honest. Asked about my daughter, was told she'd asked about me recently, wanted to know if meeting was possible. Said yes. Said I wanted to meet her, wanted to try to be some kind of presence in her life if she'd allow it. Set up a meeting for the following month. Called Patricia Hernandez's husband. He still lived in the same town, still had the same number somehow. Told him the truth about the night his wife died. Told him about the drunk kid I'd let go. Took responsibility for my role in the chain of events that led to her death. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then he said something I didn't expect. "Thank you for telling me. I've wondered for years if something could have prevented it. This doesn't bring her back, but knowing helps somehow." He didn't forgive me, I didn't deserve forgiveness, but he acknowledged the confession, and that was enough. I've driven that stretch of Route 421 3 times since that night. Haven't encountered the fog again. Haven't seen my memories projected like movies onto the mist. But I don't need to anymore. I've faced what I needed to face. I've started the process of addressing my failures instead of running from them. My daughter and I have met twice now. We're building something tentative but real. I can't undo the past, can't bring back Patricia Hernandez or the years I lost with my daughter or my father's final moments. But I can stop running. I can stop letting guilt poison everything I touch. I can try to be better going forward, make different choices, face my responsibilities instead of avoiding them. The fog taught me that memory isn't punishment. Avoidance is punishment. Confronting our failures, acknowledging them fully and honestly, is the only way to move beyond them. Some roads demand we pay a toll before we can pass, and sometimes that toll is truth, confession, and the courage to stop hiding from who we've been. What if your GPS suddenly showed an exit that doesn't exist on any map, glowing faintly in the darkness, and every fiber of your being screamed at you to take it, even though you know drivers who follow phantom exits are never seen again? Would you fight the compulsion and stay on your route? Or would you surrender to the pull of the unknown? There's a legend among truckers that's been passed down for generations, whispered in truck stops and shared on CB radios during lonely night drives. They call it the last exit. It appears on highways across the country, always at night, always when you're alone, always when you're at some kind of crossroads in your life. The exit glows with a light that doesn't come from normal street lamps, and it pulls at you with a compulsion that's almost impossible to resist. According to the stories, hundreds of drivers have taken the last exit over the decades. None of them have ever come back. Their trucks are found abandoned on the shoulder, engines running, no sign of where the drivers went or what happened to them. I've been driving trucks for 19 years, and I've heard the last exit story more times than I can count. Always dismissed it as folklore, the kind of legend that grows in the telling, becoming more dramatic with each retelling. Truckers love their ghost stories and urban legends, and I figured the last exit was just another campfire tale to pass time on boring routes. I was wrong. The last exit is real, and 3 weeks ago it appeared for me on Interstate 90 through the Pacific Northwest. I'm writing this now because I don't know if I'll be around to tell it later. I don't know if I made the right choice, and I don't know if the choice was even mine to make. It was late April, just past midnight, and I was hauling timber from Oregon toward Seattle. The highway was empty, which isn't unusual for that time of night on that stretch of road. Dense forest on both sides, mountains in the distance, the kind of landscape that feels ancient and indifferent to human presence. I'd been driving for 6 hours, was maybe 90 miles from my destination, thinking about nothing more significant than what I'd eat when I stopped for the night. That's when my GPS glitched. The screen flickered, went dark for a moment, then came back showing something that shouldn't be there. An exit. Not marked on the highway signs, not listed in any database I'd ever seen, just suddenly appearing on my GPS like it had always been there. Exit 2117B. The notation said, Terminus Point, last services. I blinked at the screen, confused, because there was no exit at this location. I knew this highway. There was nothing here except forest and darkness. But then I saw it ahead in my headlights. An exit ramp, curving away from the highway into the trees. And it was glowing. Not brightly, but with a subtle luminescence that seemed to come from the pavement itself. Like the road was made of something that produced its own light. The exit sign read 2117B Terminus Point in letters that seemed to shimmer and shift as I looked at them. Every rational part of my brain said to ignore it. Stay on the highway, keep driving toward Seattle. But there was something else. A pull I can't adequately describe. It felt like gravity, like the exit was exerting a physical force on my truck, drawing me toward it. More than that, it felt like recognition, like this exit had been waiting specifically for me, like it knew me and was calling me by name, even though it made no sound. I tried to resist. I gripped the steering wheel harder, kept my eyes on the highway ahead, told myself it was just exhaustion or some kind of optical illusion. But the pull grew stronger as I approached. My hands started to shake. My heart raced. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to take the exit, to see where it led, to finally know what waited at Terminus Point. The compulsion was overwhelming, drowning out reason and self-preservation in a wave of need so intense. It was almost painful. I thought about the stories, thought about all the drivers who disappeared after taking exits that shouldn't exist, thought about the trucks found abandoned, the investigations that went nowhere, the families left without answers. I thought about my own family, my wife of 12 years, my 2 sons, the life I'd built that wasn't perfect, but was mine. Did I want to risk all of that for an exit that glowed in the dark and pulled at me with impossible force? But beneath those thoughts was something else. Something I've never admitted to anyone. A part of me that was tired. Tired of the same routes, the same truck stops, the same conversations, the same life repeating endlessly. 19 years of driving, of being away from home more than I was there, of watching my kids grow up in snapshots between runs, of maintaining a marriage across phone calls and video chats. The last exit promised something different. Unknown, possibly dangerous, maybe fatal, but different. The exit was 50 yards ahead now. The glow was brighter, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. My turn signal clicked on by itself. I hadn't touched it. But my truck seemed to have made the decision on its own. Or maybe I'd made it subconsciously, my hands acting while my conscious mind was still debating. The wheel turned slightly to the right, angling toward the exit ramp. I was going to take it. Despite everything I knew, despite all the warnings, despite the rational terror screaming in the back of my mind, I was going to take the last exit. In that moment, as my truck drifted toward the exit and the glow surrounded my windshield, I saw something that made me hesitate. Reflected in my mirror, barely visible in the darkness behind me, were lights. Dozens of pairs of headlights stretched back along the highway as far as I could see. Trucks, all heading toward this same exit, all being pulled by the same compulsion. I realized I wasn't alone in this. The last exit wasn't calling just to me. It was calling to all of us, every driver who'd reached some breaking point, some moment of exhaustion or desperation or simple curiosity. I saw the trucks in my mirror clearly now, and they weren't all modern rigs. Some looked old, vintage models from decades past. Some were translucent, ghost-like, barely visible. And I understood. These were all the drivers who'd taken the last exit over the years, still traveling that road, still approaching that glowing ramp, caught in an eternal loop of the moment they'd made their choice. Or maybe they'd already taken it, and this was what waited on the other side. An endless highway leading to an exit you could approach forever, but never fully reach. My foot moved to the brake. Not a conscious decision, just a reaction to seeing those phantom trucks, to understanding what taking the last exit might actually mean. I slowed down. The compulsion pushed back, grew stronger, tried to force my foot back to the accelerator. It felt like hands on my shoulders, like voices in my head, like every regret and what if and road not taken in my life was pulling me toward that exit with combined force. I thought about my oldest son, 16 years old, who'd asked me last month to teach him to drive. I'd said maybe, said I'd be home soon, said we'd do it next time I had a few days off. How many times had I said that? How many moments had I missed because I was out here on the highway, chasing miles and paychecks, convincing myself I was providing for my family when really I was just avoiding the harder work of being present in their lives. I thought about my wife, who'd stopped asking when I'd be home, and started just marking it on the calendar with resignation. The distance between us that had grown slowly, almost imperceptibly, until we were strangers who shared a house and a history, but not much else. I'd blamed the job, blamed the economy, blamed everything except my own choices to take longer routes, accept more runs, stay out on the road where everything was simple, and my only responsibility was keeping the truck between the lines. The last exit promised escape from all of that. Release from the weight of expectations and responsibilities, and the grinding monotony of a life that felt like it was happening to me rather than being lived by me. But looking at those ghost trucks in my mirror, I realized escape isn't the same as freedom. Taking the last exit wouldn't solve anything. It would just be the final, ultimate act of avoidance, the ultimate abandonment of everyone who depended on me. My truck was halfway into the exit lane now, the glowing pavement directly beneath my wheels. The pull was so strong I could barely breathe. But I made a choice. I cranked the wheel hard to the left, fighting against the compulsion, fighting against my own exhaustion and doubt and desire to just give up. The truck lurched back onto the main highway, tires squealing, the whole rig shuddering with the violent correction. The last exit flashed past on my right, the glow fading behind me. In my mirror, I watched it recede, watched those phantom trucks continue their approach to that glowing ramp, watched the exit itself shimmer and fade until it was gone completely, like it had never existed at all. My GPS flickered again, and when it stabilized, exit 2117B was gone from the display. The highway stretched ahead, normal and dark and mundane. I pulled over at the next rest area and sat shaking for 20 minutes. Then I called my wife. It was late, nearly 1 in the morning, but she answered on the second ring with worry in her voice, because I never call that late unless something's wrong. I told her I loved her. Told her I was coming home after this run and taking a week off, no excuses, no last-minute loads. Told her I wanted to teach our son to drive, wanted to have dinner as a family, wanted to be present instead of just physically there. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Okay." Just okay. But I could hear something in her voice that had been missing for a long time. Hope, maybe, or just surprise that I'd finally said what she'd been waiting years to hear. We talked for an hour, really talked, about things we'd been avoiding, about the distance between us, about what we both wanted going forward. It wasn't a magic fix. One phone call doesn't undo years of absence and avoidance. But it was a start. I've thought about the last exit every day since that night. Wondered what would have happened if I'd taken it. Wondered where it leads and what terminus point really is. The romantic part of me wants to believe it's some kind of trucker's paradise. A place where the road goes on forever and you're free from all earthly concerns. The realistic part of me knows it's probably just death or disappearance, or some kind of supernatural trap that feeds on exhausted drivers who've reached the end of their rope. But here's what I've realized. The last exit isn't really about the destination. It's about the choice. It appears when you're at a crossroads, when you're so tired of your life that escape seems preferable to continuing. And in that moment, you have to decide if you're going to run from your problems or face them. I chose to face them, chose to go home, have hard conversations, make changes in how I live and work. Chose my family over escape. The last exit is still out there. It appears for other drivers on other nights, offering the same impossible choice. Maybe some of them take it. Maybe that's their right, their decision to make when the weight becomes too heavy to carry. I don't judge them. I came within feet of taking it myself. But I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I chose to stay, to fight through the exhaustion and doubt and fear, to bet on the possibility that life could be different if I made different choices. I'm home now, writing this at my kitchen table while my family sleeps upstairs. Tomorrow I'm teaching my son to drive. Next week my wife and I are going to counseling, trying to rebuild what we've let deteriorate. It's hard work, harder than taking the last exit would have been. But it's real work, meaningful work, the kind that might actually lead somewhere worth going. To everyone in the Verified Fears family who's out there driving tonight, who's tired and alone and wondering if it's all worth it, I want you to know you're not alone in feeling that way. The road takes a toll on all of us, physically and mentally and emotionally. And sometimes we're offered exits that promise escape from the struggle. But I'm here to tell you that staying on the main highway, as hard as it is, as monotonous as it sometimes feels, is worth it. The people who love you, who are waiting for you to come home, who depend on you, they're worth fighting for. If you've got stories about the last exit or any other encounters on the lonely highways, drop them in the comments. Share your experiences with the family, because that's what we are. A family of people who understand the darkness of the road, who face the strange and impossible and live to tell about it. Hit that like button if this story resonated with you. Subscribe to Verified Fears to stay part of this community. And remember that no matter how dark the road gets, no matter how strong the pull toward that glowing exit might be, you always have the choice to keep driving toward home. Stay safe out there, horror family. The road is long, but we travel it together, and that makes all the difference.